If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. What's the freakiest and most terrifying phantom paranormal experience or encounter you've ever had that still spooks you to this day? Yellow-eyed shadow man. So I've been in the hospital for the past week since I had a major operation. Everything's going fine now, doctors are letting me out soon. So being the ghost hunter I like to think I am, I've been on the lookout for paranormal things due to it being an old hospital. I've not seen or heard anything that I would call paranormal until tonight. 2 days ago I was moved into an outside single room on my ward. Tonight I was looking into the blank space of the TV in my room, watching a reflection of the people walking as they passed. Yeah, I know, time well spent. So, as I watch this one shadow walk past slowly, it looks pretty tall. I'm 6 feet 4 inches, so it was taller than that. And as the shadow came to a stop, I watched it turn. Now mind you, I'm still thinking it's someone who's gotten lost, but hell no, it turns and looks dead straight at my room. Yep, and you guessed it, it's time to call the nurse for a change of pants. Not only is this creature much taller than I am, but it also has yellow eyes in the reflection. Now I'm man enough to say that I was scared, and this was one of the times. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't see anyone walk past the door in this time, and it's safe to say I for one will not be sleeping anytime soon. It didn't last that long, only a few seconds, but long enough for me to be thinking, WTF? Small stick man. I was walking a trail by woods and a creek one day with my, oblivious to everything, pug. Suddenly, I saw what appeared to be a man only 18 to 24 inches tall, made entirely of twigs, who was starting to cross the trail. Then he suddenly shot upward, into the trees, I assumed. He wasn't like what I'd think of as a gnome, he didn't have real heft to his body, just twigs as a trunk and twig arms and legs. It was too quick for me to see a face. Has anyone heard of or seen anything like this? Hey everyone. I did a road trip through New Mexico a couple of years ago, and it was so unique and beautiful, although there was definitely an energy different from any other state I've been to. In particular, my partner and I had an eerie experience at the Box Recreation Area, near Socorro, New Mexico. We didn't necessarily see anything, but the energy was very off for both of us. I'm a pretty skeptical person when it comes to the paranormal. I tend to try to find a logical explanation for things, but something about this experience still makes both of us get chills just thinking about it. We stopped to camp here overnight and arrived there around 2 p.m. There wasn't a single cloud in the sky, and it was warm outside, during the summer. We were the only ones there, got out of the car to scope out the area, and started to walk through the canyon. While exploring the canyon's caves and ridges, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. That's when I noticed that I had been swiping at this fly that just wouldn't leave me alone. It would go away and then circle back around. Whatever, it was annoying, but what could I do about it? The lighting started to change, and I looked up, and there were these dark, stormy clouds above us. It's primarily covering the canyon, and outside of the canyon area, the sky is blue. The temperature feels a lot cooler, and the wind is really picking up at this point. At this point, the fly is really getting on my nerves because it's being so aggressive. It doesn't matter what I do or the heavy wind at this point, it seems like it's after me. The feeling of being watched is only intensifying, and I look to my partner, who also looks on edge. We both look at each other, realizing that we both feel uneasy, and decide to turn back to the car. We return to the car, and I slam the door because the fly is still pursuing me. I'm in the passenger seat, and it lands on the side mirrors and just stays there, watching me through the window. My partner and I don't know why, but we both feel that something is sinister and off, and we decide that we need to get out of here as soon as possible. We must have been in that canyon for a maximum of 20 minutes, but it felt so much longer. So that's my story. Again, nothing was necessarily strange, but the whole experience just had me on edge, makes my hair stand up whenever I think about it. If anyone has similar stories or experiences, I would love to hear about them. Maybe this whole experience was just wrong timing. Thanks. The Black-Eyed Children of Abilene. So, many have claimed to have seen them, have talked to them, or have disappeared because of them. I can tell you for a fact that they are real. This happened when COVID-19 was at its deadliest, when I was home alone while my grandfather was having heart surgery. It was around 10 p.m., and I was home from my step-grandmother's. I had started to make some tea to drink and watch Toonami. I was halfway through a Dragon Ball episode when I heard a knock on my door. My dogs froze and started growling at the front door. My first thought was to put them in the bedroom and open the door, but I felt my dog at the time bite my hand, pulling me away from the front door. The knocking continued, and a kid's head peeked through my front window. I could tell it was a little boy with brown hair, freckled skin, and black eyes. "Ma'am, can you open the door? We came to play with A." I knew for a fact that my little sister didn't live with me or my grandpa. I felt compelled to open the door again, only to feel my pupper pull me back. I left the room and went into the kitchen. I could hear them still knocking, now also at my side door. My dogs were growling in both directions, backing me into a safe corner of the house. I remember waking up the next day on the kitchen floor, my dogs around me. I still fear that they may knock on that door again, and this time, I won't be there. Odd structure out in the woods. I hope this is a good place to talk about this, and if anyone knows what it was and can relate to my situation, please let me know. I was recently on a camping trip in the prairies of Sask, Canada. Our group was canoeing up a river that is very isolated and without nearby towns, and as we were going along, I spotted a structure about 100 meters up the riverbank. I should mention that I got a very, very eerie feeling, and even though it was hot as hell, the hairs on my arms were up. This structure was constructed of various twigs and branches, intermixed with deer and elk antlers. There were 3 structures total, 2 small ones and 1 large one. The largest was conical in shape and was tied together with something I couldn't tell. It looked somewhat like a teepee. But, in the center of the largest one, there was a raised platform made of twigs, about 3 feet off the ground and about 5 feet long. It looked very old and messy, like it was built quickly or had been sitting there for a long time. I showed my canoe partner and the pair in the canoe next to us, and they didn't know what it was either. They all said it was creepy. We didn't talk about it much and kept going. We made camp on the riverbank about an hour past the structures. That night, still feeling very eerie, I had to step away from the campsite, about 30 meters back, to pee. I was crouched there, doing my thing, and I heard my friend's voice in the bush in front of me. It sounded like they had asked, "What did you just say?" Even though I didn't speak. I was so scared because when I looked back to camp, my friend was sitting at the campsite still. I wouldn't have been able to hear them that clearly from this distance. I stood up and listened, and when I did, I heard what sounded like a hum. Like a man humming somewhere off in the distance. It only lasted maybe 20 seconds, then stopped. I took off back to the campsite and told my friends, but they didn't hear anything other than the hum, very faintly. We didn't really sleep that night and continued on early the next morning and finished our trip later that afternoon. I don't know what this was. I don't know what spoke to me. I didn't see anything other than those structures and didn't hear anything other than the voice and the hum. Maybe I was matrixing the hum because of the nearby water, but I couldn't hear the water from where I was. The only thing I know for sure was that I didn't feel right for that entire trip. I was very, very scared. Has anyone else had an experience like this? Was it paranormal? I don't know if the truck was real. When I was 9, I went to a sleepaway camp for the summer. The sleepaway camp itself was massive and very isolated. The kids were separated into age groups and gender. All these different groups slept in different camp areas in these wood cabins. My group happened to be one of the largest and most developed, and because it was right off the main road in the camp, it allowed easy access for cars to come into our area. My story happened one night when I woke up and needed to pee. My cabin didn't have a bathroom, so I had to walk down this hill to the bathhouse, which was right next to the entrance where cars can come in. When I left the cabin, I saw that there was a white pickup truck in front of the bathhouse with its headlights on. I found it strange, but it got stranger when I got closer to the truck and nobody was inside. I figured that the driver would be in the bathhouse, but when I got in, there was nobody. I was starting to get spooked, so I did my thing as fast as possible, only about a minute, and when I left the bathhouse, the truck was gone, and there was no sign it was even there. This shocked me, as the truck was close enough to the bathhouse that I would have been able to hear it leave, but I heard nothing. This freaked me out, so I ran back up the hill to my cabin and just sat in bed for the rest of the night, not being able to sleep. When the sun came up, I went back outside to check the area where the truck had been, and there weren't even track marks, which would be impossible since the ground was very muddy. To this day I still don't know what happened or if the truck was really there or not. A phantom cat attack. My wife and I encountered a malevolent spirit that attacked me and left me with scratch marks on my head. Back in the early 2000s, my then fiancé and I rented the end unit of a 4-unit townhouse in the hills of Manchester, New Hampshire. Late at night we would hear thumping and banging from the second floor. We originally thought nothing of it because we owned a 13-pound Maine Coon cat that loved to chase her toy mice late at night. We were later introduced to our neighbors, a single mom with 2 teenage boys, who fought incessantly. If our cat was asleep on her perch, any thumps or banging were naturally dismissed as the boys next door. Things got weird once we settled in. The neighbors would not be home, and our cat would be asleep high on her cat perch, and we could still hear loud thumps and bangs on the second floor. We had gut feelings that something was up but never thought it was anything malevolent. We hosted a party at our house, and our friend, a known sensitive, came into the kitchen and asked, "What's with the old woman upstairs?" We gave him a blank stare, not knowing what the heck he was talking about. Another friend, less sensitive, walked to the top of the stairs and refused to go any further without someone being with her. Late one night my fiancé and I were getting ready to go to bed. Without my contact lenses or glasses, my vision is not the best. I thought I had seen my cat poking her head out from the second bedroom doorway. When I knelt down and whispered if she was okay, half expecting her usual meow, the cat lunged at me, scratching my head. I fell backwards and exclaimed a profanity, saying, "That freaking cat scratched my face." My fiancé, now alert to the situation, said, "How's that possible? The cat is on our bed?" Sure enough, she was eagerly waiting for us to fall asleep so she could go hunting at night and bring us her catch, which consisted of her fake mice. Through our investigation, we determined there was an elderly woman who resided on the second floor and did not approve of my fiancé and I living together. We sage rubbed the townhouse and moved out shortly thereafter. Lastly, my now wife and I reside in Atkinson, New Hampshire, with our 2 beautiful children. Phantom wind chimes. Let me begin by saying that I am quite interested in spiritual topics, Bigfoot, and similar subjects. Last night at about 2 a.m., I woke up from extremely vivid dreams that contained no negative elements. However, I felt a strange sense of panic and disorientation, which was unusual for me since I am accustomed to dreaming constantly, and it resembled the anxiety I experience after a nightmare. I'm in bed wondering what the duck is wrong with me because I remember the dream clearly, and there's no cause for fear. I feel like something is missing or off, like derealization, if I had to pick something. So I go outside to smoke a cigarette and chill when all of a sudden in the dark woods, maybe 20 to 30 feet away, I hear wind chimes. I've lived here for 10 years, no one has wind chimes. It doesn't sound like a cowbell or a cat bell or anything like that, it sounds like pretty wind chime music. I rub my face and the inside of my ears and am like, I must be tripping, but I know not to give attention to or follow weird noises. I go inside, kind of freaked out, and then come back out for a smoke later, and no wind chimes. This morning I smoked and walked far into the woods, that way, no wind chimes. I have never experienced auditory hallucinations like that, nor have I ever taken hallucinogenic drugs. We'll go back out tonight around the same time, I guess. Shasta County, California. A red flash, a circular object, and then an 8-foot hairy creature were sighted. I had an incident happen about 8 years ago, when I was living in Shasta County, California. I figured you'd be interested in hearing it. One evening while I was watching television in my living room, I noticed a bright red flash come through the window nearest me. The flash came from my backyard. I looked outside and was shocked to see what appeared to be a flat circular object hovering, then landing, in the field behind my garage. There were blue and white lights flashing intermittently around the object. There was mist or smoke rising from it. I first thought it might be a large helicopter, but it was silent. After a few seconds, the object instantly vanished in another bright flash. It stunned me and left me wondering what I had just witnessed. I waited for a few minutes, then went outside with a spotlight to take a look. I am single, so I was alone. There are a few houses on the other side of the field, but the distance to the nearest property is about a quarter mile. I didn't see any other people investigating the lights. There was nothing to indicate that the object had landed in the field, so I decided to wait and look some more the next day. I didn't find any evidence the next morning. I estimated that the object had been about 50 or so feet in diameter. That night something happened that has changed my belief in the unknown. I was sitting in the living room watching television at about 9:30 p.m., and once again I was stunned by another bright red flash coming from the backyard. I immediately got up from my chair and looked out the window. There was a full moon, so I noticed that in the same location that I saw the object land the night before, there was something moving around. I didn't know what to think or what to do. I wondered if I should call the authorities, but then I'd have to tell them about the flash of light and what I had witnessed the previous night. I just sat there with the lights and television off for several minutes. I then started to hear dogs barking in the distance. Suddenly, I heard something hit the side of the garage, followed by a deep groaning sound. I sat there quietly when I saw a faint shadow move across the window. The window is almost 7 feet from the ground, but the shadow completely blacked out any light. It was moving towards the front of the house. I got up and looked out the dining room window. There was a huge hairy creature illuminated by the light on the utility pole. It must have been 8 to 9 feet high and had a massive body. This beast had to be a Bigfoot. As I continued to watch this creature, it walked away from my property and then into the adjacent field. I went upstairs and sat at my bedroom window, just waiting to see if the creature returned. The next morning, I walked around my property looking for tracks. I did find an indentation in the ground that measured 15 inches long and 6 inches across, but I'm not sure if it had been from the creature. I didn't find anything unusual, apart from a cinder block lying by the garage. It had to have been brought there. To this day, I have only told a few friends about the incident. I wonder if the Bigfoot had come from a UFO or if it came on its own. CK. Who/what clicks in the woods? Does anyone have experiences of extremely loud clicking in the woods? Like a pen on steroids? I've heard this twice, both times in a remote area. It's at our off-grid family cabin in Alberta, Canada, which we've been going to since 2007. I have spent tons of time there at different times of the year and, up until last year, have never heard anything like this. The first time was down in an old growth area, and my fiancé and I were bushwalking in the summer and heard this insanely loud clicking that stopped us in our tracks. It sounded like it was coming from high up in a tree, but we couldn't pinpoint from where exactly. It was disconcerting. We immediately turned back to walk back to where we had parked our side-by-side, and as we were walking, my fiancé heard a loud thump of some kind on the ground, seemingly back from where we had just been. Last fall, I was at the cabin by myself and heard the same kind of loud clicking seeming to come from a spruce tree about 25 feet in front of me. The clicking started, went on for a few seconds, and stopped, and then more clicking started up that seemed to be coming from an adjacent spruce tree, maybe 15 feet to the right. I can't remember how many times it went back and forth, but it really seemed like communication between two things. I am really interested in Sasquatch and have had a number of experiences at the cabin with what I feel could only be Sasquatch based on deduction and my interest in the topic, but I haven't heard people talk about this clicking in relation to them. Any input is much appreciated. It freaks me out, ha ha. Since my first experience in the spring of 2021, I have always been alert and aware of my surroundings, but this clicking sound adds a new layer of strangeness that I would really like input on. As a side note, I am very passionate about biology and wildlife, and I am confident that, based on my familiarity with the location and my interest in nature, the sound was not produced by an insect. Thanks so much for listening. Phantom Light. My best friend and I were walking back to his place from downtown about 10 years ago. I was about 20, and he was about 24. The street we were going up had no sidewalks, so we were walking in the middle of the street goofing around like normal when we saw what we thought were headlights coming up behind us. We slowed down and pulled off to the side of the road to let the car go by. The light kept getting brighter and brighter until it was so bright it lit up everything to the point that we couldn't see. Nothing passed us, though, and there was no sound at all. There was no car. We looked up to see if it was a helicopter or something, and there was nothing above us. I would have shrugged it off, but we were passing by a house party at the same time, and all of the guests saw the same thing we did. None of us had any idea what it was or where it could have gone. There was no noise, just a light coming towards us at about the speed of a car, maybe 40 kilometers per hour, getting brighter to the point that it was blinding when it should have passed us, but nothing passed us, not on the road or in the air, and then it was just dark again. Like nothing had ever been there. Farmstead Phantom. This story takes place on a farmstead in Ireland. The activity was particularly strong in the cabin, cowshed. Really, I don't know when this started or what it is. However, I'm about 87% sure it's demonic in nature. My family is very extremely Christian. The farmstead has had countless blessings in it and countless masses. The house itself was built on a famine trail. Basically on the left side of the house in the living room, there's a trail. A trail people during the famine used to take to the shore to mass. A long time ago, there would be activity, stuff ripped out of walls. Footsteps, voices, possibly apparitions. A step was put in outside so the spirits would take a different route. Around the house. So now it's ceased. But now I think something else has moved in. Feeding off their energy. It first happened about 3 years ago. Late at night I'd smell sulfur. Hear rustling. Nothing much. Then I would feel an unbearable feeling of terror. A burning sensation in my chest would rise up like heartburn around 3 a.m. I would squeeze my eyes shut because I felt if I opened them, I'd die. It was terrifying and would always take place from 3 to 4 a.m. That's the weak part. In the cowshed outside, it's even worse. There's just such an oppressive feeling. Once I think I even saw something. The figure was crouched in a corner. There was nothing shadowy about it. Nothing ghostly about it. It was solid. A woman, I think, with her back turned, crouched in the corner. I didn't see it first. I smelled it. Like rotting flesh and sulfur. I'd gone in for my skateboard that was leaning against the wall. When I smelled that, I spun round, spying it in the far end of the cowshed, crouched near some farm tools. As soon as I saw it, I knew it saw me. Even though it stayed turned the whole time. Just an oppressive feeling of guilt and terror. I felt unreasonably violent. I wanted to end something. But all my feelings just faded, and I just felt numb, so I realized I was walking towards it. As soon as I realized it, it all bubbled up again, and I could hear screaming. So loud. I turned heel and ran. Locking the door behind me and sprinting back inside. I've never felt anything like that before. It happened once. I've been back since. I have been back in that cowshed since, but I still feel uneasy there, and my dog always whimpers when we are inside. I'm going back there in a week or so for Easter. Not looking forward to it. Do you have any thoughts on what it could be? I saw a burning tower block in the Somerset, UK, countryside on a drive home, in a spot where no tower exists. It's taken a very long time to even consider sharing this anywhere, and I am genuinely sharing this today because I would finally like to begin to understand what I saw. I am neither pushing any supernatural angle nor claiming anything dramatic. I just want to one day find a logical explanation for something that has stayed with me for years. The incident happened in early summer 2017 on a Tuesday evening. I was driving home to Frome, UK, from Shepton Mallet, and the light was just starting to move into that early sunset stage. It was still bright with clear visibility. As I came around a bend in the road, something up ahead caught my eye straight away. It made me stop and pay full attention. In the distance, towering above the horizon/tree line, I saw what looked exactly like a tall, dark tower block with rows of glowing orange squares. They flickered like fire. The outline was sharp and rectangular. It looked structured and nothing like a cloud or a reflection. My first feeling was a little panic, as, to be honest, what I was seeing was clearly a tower block of flats on fire. There was no other way to describe what it was. I slowed down and tried to work out where it was and if I needed to turn around or anything. Within a few seconds, I remembered that there are no tall buildings of any kind around that area. Certainly nothing that resembled the size or shape of what I was looking at. Once that sank in, the initial panic faded and turned into confusion. I kept driving, and the same shape kept appearing through gaps in the trees. Every time I saw it, it looked identical. A tall black silhouette with glowing orange windows. It was a burning building. It stayed in the same place on the horizon and did not seem to come any closer or move further away, even after seeing it on and off over about 3 miles of driving. I tried to follow the direction of it so I could get a clear view. I thought if I could just get an open stretch of road, I would finally understand what it was. But when I reached the point where I should have had the clearest view, it had vanished. Not faded or changed shape. It was simply gone. When I got home that night, I searched online for any reports of a fire. I checked Twitter for personal sightings, news sites, anything local. There was nothing at all. No smoke. No flames. No emergency activity. So I went to bed without an answer. The next morning, the television was already on. The first thing I saw when I woke up was the news coverage of the Grenfell Tower fire in London. It was the first thing I had seen since the night before that visually matched what I had been trying to make sense of. The dark tower. The orange glowing window shapes. The flickering light. It was exactly what I saw towering in front of me the night before. I want to be clear that I am not saying I saw Grenfell or anything connected to it. The timings do not match, as what I saw was about 4 hours before the fire in London started. I am only explaining why the experience stayed in my mind and why I kept thinking about it afterwards. It was difficult speaking to people at work the next day, as the news of the Grenfell fire was breaking. People wondered if I had misinterpreted something or if it could have been a trick of the light. They even questioned whether it might have been a hallucination. I doubted my own memory many times. The thing that stops me from dismissing it is the simple fact that I was not alone. My partner was with me the entire time. They saw the exact same thing. They reacted at the same moment. They described the burning building. We spoke about it as it was happening, and our memories line up perfectly today. So whatever it was not just in my head. I am sharing this because I would genuinely like someone to explain what might cause something like this. A rational explanation would actually be a relief after so many years of wondering. I would also love to know if anyone else happened to be on that same stretch of road that evening, although I realize the chances are very slim. This was on the A361, heading towards Frome from Shepton Mallet, on the hill/dual carriageway leading up to the Nunny Catch roundabout. Has anyone else ever had a shared visual experience with their partner that made no sense at the time and remains unexplained even years later? Any thoughts would be appreciated. Heard something as a child that I can't explain. I was around 10 years old and was staying at my grandparents' house for the night. When I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep late at night, I kept hearing all these sounds that I can only describe as a dinner party. A bunch of people talking to each other and plates and silverware clattering around. It wasn't a distant sound, but it was kind of muffled at the same time and sounded like an old tape or something. I don't know how to explain it, but it sounded old-fashioned. And it was the same set of sounds sort of just playing on a loop. I couldn't make out the words they were saying, it was just a bunch of voices mixed together. I couldn't figure out where these sounds were coming from. I kept getting up and searching around the house to try to find the source of it. My grandma had one of those tiny little TVs on her nightstand next to her bed and would often fall asleep to it, but when I checked, the TV wasn't on that night. Everyone in the house was asleep, and nothing was going on, no TVs were on. But every time I tried to lie back down and relax, the dinner party sounds would come back into my ears and become more and more intense. There was a computer in the room I was sleeping in, like an early 2000s computer with the big monitor. I thought maybe it could have been coming from that somehow, so I unplugged it, but I could still hear it. I remember feeling pretty freaked out. I was wide awake when this was happening, so I don't think it was a sleep paralysis type of thing, because I distinctly remember being restless that night and kept getting up to find the sound. The only explanation I can consider is a form of auditory hallucination, although I have never experienced anything similar before or since. I have lived a pretty mundane life with very little of the paranormal or supernatural in it. I've never even experienced sleep paralysis in my life, 35 now. My father, on the other hand, is very prone to such things, so I will share some of his experiences as well. What little I have to share may sound mundane, but at least it's 100% true. 1. The giant snail. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing at my grandmother's house. The house would later become ours when my grandmother moved to a better location. One evening, around dusk, I go out on the porch and see the most ridiculous thing, a giant pink snail. Its shell was at least a foot high, and it was chugging across the porch like any regular snail. It was plain as day and about 10 feet from where I stood. It looked like something from that old Dr. Dolittle movie. I got extremely excited and stuck my head back inside to tell my grandmother what I saw. But, to my disappointment, when I looked again 1 second later, the snail had vanished. There were no signs of them, no snail trails or anything. It's possible that I hallucinated, but I've never hallucinated anything before or since, as far as I'm aware. 2. The dog driver. My father was an over-the-road truck driver. He drove an 18-wheeler all over the USA and parts of Canada. During the summers, I'd go on the road with him. His truck had bunk beds. It was a rainy day in 1998 in Pennsylvania. I remember because advertisements for the movie Godzilla were everywhere. My father was back in the sleeper taking a nap, and I was up in the passenger seat playing my Game Boy and looking out the window. I was looking over at the truck parked next to us when I saw something that instantly made me sick to my stomach. It looked to be a human man with a dog/wolf snout. He had normal grayish hair on top, kind of spiked up with some wax or gel, but as my eyes went downward, and I saw the snout, I freaked out and jumped back in the sleeper to wake my father up. When we looked again, there was no one up front in that truck, and the curtains were pulled on its sleeper. I had difficulty going into the truck stop we were parked at because I was afraid I would encounter the dog driver. Later in life, I attempted to rationalize my experience by convincing myself that I had seen a driver and his dog and that in the rain, I had somehow mistaken them for a single entity. But that really isn't what I saw, and I doubt it would have made me sick to my stomach if that's all it was. 3. Dad's first UFO. It was around 1975. My father and a friend were out walking in rural Alabama. They reached the top of a hill, and down in the valley below, they both saw a stereotypical flying saucer, silver, hovering above ground in the valley below. My dad's friend wanted to go check it out, but my father quipped that he wasn't ready to go to Mars and insisted they get out of there, which they promptly did. 4. Dad's second UFO. In the early 90s my dad was driving his 18-wheeler through Arkansas and saw another flying saucer come down out of the sky, hit the ground, skid across a nearby field, and come to rest against a fence. My father gets on the CB radio and calls out to other drivers in the area and says, "Hey, did anyone else just see that flying saucer hit that fence?" Another voice comes on and says, "Yes. We'll take care of it." My father kept driving and didn't look into it any further. 5. Dad's third UFO. This third sighting happened, once again while driving his 18-wheeler, through New Mexico. This one looked more like a ball of light. It shot out of the sky and hovered above his truck at equal speeds to him for some time before breaking off to the right and zipping out of sight. 6. My only UFO. I only have one UFO experience to speak of, and it's not much of one. My dad was mowing the yard at our home in Alabama. He calls me outside and says he wants to show me something. So, I go out, and he tells me to look up. Far off in the distance, I see what appears to be a black cube, or something shaped like the sand crawler from Star Wars. It's very tiny since it's so far away. We stand there and watch it for around 20 minutes. It just floats in place. Occasionally what appears to be a vent on the right or left side would open and close, appearing to help it stabilize itself as it floats. Eventually we got bored of watching it and went inside. I didn't believe it to be a UFO at the time and figured there must be some other explanation for it. In retrospect, I am not sure what it could have been. It could have been a weather balloon, but I have Googled pics of those, and this was different because it was black and cubic in shape. I saw no round balloon shape holding it up there. Phantom cat. So, about 8 years ago, my older brother and I were driving to a nearby gas station to fill up the car. My brother was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. As we were pulling into the station, I saw a black cat running across the road, which was unusual because the station is located on a busy highway, and despite visiting that station for years, I had never seen a cat there before or since. Yet, as I observed this cat crossing the road, reaching approximately the midpoint, suddenly, it dissolved into a cloud of smoke right before my eyes. I was completely stunned, and I was super confused. I was watching a cat 1 second, and the next, it turned into smoke. I remained totally silent, and I didn't say anything to my brother next to me, because I was still processing it, and I wondered if I was going crazy or if my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But then, out of nowhere, my brother suddenly spoke up and said, "Hey, did you just see a cat running across the road that, faded away into smoke?" And I was super relieved and was like, "Oh good, you saw that too." I thought I was going crazy. Turns out both of us saw the exact same thing. What was a black cat running across the road and then suddenly fading into smoke and dissipating away? We still talk about this when we drive together. It was an odd and strange experience, but I'm glad we both got to experience it together, as it made for a cool talking topic. Phantom of the Woods. I'm so glad I found this community, because I have quite a wild experience that I'm still not sure what to make of. I live in the middle of nowhere. I moved to my current town about 12 years ago, and it has about 100 people and is surrounded by wooded areas. We have a local legend about a naked phantom woman that steals people's hunting kills and steals hunting supplies, mostly knives, nets, and rifle ammunition. She has pale pink skin and black hair and wears a white mask that kind of resembles the tragedy mask. The wind whistles here, and you can sometimes hear what sounds like crying in it, which is said to be her. I thought it was just a legend, but I've actually seen this woman, and so have many other people. I was out fishing with my father when we saw her. We were keeping our fish, and as we were packing up, my dad pointed out what looked like a naked woman watching us. When I realized she had pink skin, I got pretty scared. She was peering out from behind a tree across the river from us. We both stared at her for a few seconds, and then she ran off. That was when I was 16, and I saw her again when I was 19. I was hiking in the woods with my boyfriend one night, and we saw her sitting against a tree staring up at the moon. When she saw us, she got up and booked it. The unsettling aspect is that when she ran away, we didn't hear any footsteps. She was sitting around tons of sticks, yet none of them broke when she walked on them. What really freaks me out about this is that everyone just seems to accept this as normal. People's supplies go missing all the time, and I've heard multiple accounts of seeing her eating dead animals. I have a neighbor who was out duck hunting, shot one down, and then couldn't find it but found barefoot human footprints in the area. This isn't a part of the folklore of the native tribes here, either, so I don't know what it could be. It doesn't end there, though. I've explored the woods around here very thoroughly and came upon an old and broken wooden hut about 4 miles from town. Inside it I found a bunch of old knives, but that was it. It made me wonder if that's where she lives. If this was just some deranged person, she couldn't be naked all the time with how cold our winters are. There were no signs of a fire pit anywhere around the hut. There weren't any blankets or clothes in there, only a bunch of knives. After spending about 10 minutes there, a sudden wave of severe anxiety overcame me, prompting me to swiftly leave. Since then, every time I go out hunting, fishing, or even for just a walk in the woods, I feel like I'm being watched. I probably should have left that little hut alone. Everyone around her just calls her the Phantom of the Woods, and I think she truly lives up to that title. Part of me wants to believe she's just some crazy person, but there's too much backing up that she really is a phantom. The Phantom Road construction. Did we travel in time? A bit of context first. I live in a small town that, together with 2 other smaller towns from the neighboring state, composes a kind of cluster. Like a triangle with a town on each tip, let's call them towns A, mine, B, and C. The towns are no more than 4 miles apart from each other and are all connected. For as long as I've been alive, the roads between A, B, and B, C, have been paved, but the A, C, route has remained a dirt road. I've been in both towns countless times, traveled these roads by bus, car, motorcycle, bicycle, and even on foot on some occasions. I know these paths like the back of my hand. It's a beautiful place, surrounded by wooded hills, coffee and grape crops, rural communities, etc. So, it's SH 2019, and the prefectures of my town and Town C decide to pave the road between them. Since they're in different states, they agree to start paving each one's own side until the construction meets at the border. Great news for both towns. The construction begins. Every now and then I hear that the road is looking great. People would say things like, "I've been to Town C this weekend, and the construction looks nice already, and I can't wait until the road is finished," and so on. 2020 comes around, and so does COVID. Right before the lockdown strikes, we learn that the road was almost finished. Constructions were close to meeting each other at the state border. After around 1 month stuck indoors, we're desperate for a change of scenery and some fresh air, so we decided to take a drive along towns B and C, enjoying the view and some music. We wouldn't even get out of the car, we'd just drive. At this point, we had heard that the construction had finished and the road was now smooth and paved. I specifically remember my grandmother saying it as she went to Town C to deliver supplies to her sister at the time. One morning we all hop in the car and just take off. We went to Town B, then Town C, but as we left Town C, ready to enter the road, we were shocked to find that nothing had changed. It was still the same old dirt road we had known for decades. Confused, we returned home, noticing that we were the only ones on the road that day. We couldn't spot any signs of construction or new infrastructure. Absolutely nothing had changed. We heard so much about it from so many different people, it just made no sense. The only strange thing was that we didn't see anyone else on the road but us after we left Town C. It was a bit unusual, but nothing impossible at that time. Apart from all that, it was a beautiful day, and we all had a great time. When we shared our experience with relatives and friends, they found it just as puzzling as we did. Some even suggested that we might have taken the wrong road, but we know that is absolutely impossible. However, by the end of 2020, when things were getting back to normal, we decided to revisit the road. As everyone had claimed before our first drive, the road was indeed paved. My father jokingly suggests that we may have traveled in time, and sometimes, I wonder if there's some truth to it. Phantom footsteps in the woods. In November 2021. My GF and I went camping in Missouri. I won't give away the exact location, but it's one of our favorite free campsites, and it's on the hillside of rural Middle Missouri. We pulled up, and we're starting to get our stuff out of the van and over to the picnic table at this single campsite. No one else was there, as the trail nearby is open and visible to the campsite, and the parking lot is a small, open gravel lot. I set the tent down on the picnic table, and I had to pee, so I stepped over to the side of the campsite and did my business. My GF was just looking around, and all of a sudden I heard her stop moving. Now, because it's late fall, there are tons of leaves on the ground, and you can hear when someone moves or stops moving. I ask if she's okay, and she is dead silent. I figured she didn't hear me, so I asked again. And again she didn't respond, which got me a bit worried as I knew she was right behind me standing still. I finished my business and turned around to ask again what was wrong when I felt something wrong. Looking into the trail that went down from the campsite, you could clearly see an empty trail covered in a thin layer of leaves. And I heard what my GF was apparently hearing, footsteps coming up the trail towards us. Clearly only 10 to 15 feet in front of us were footsteps coming towards us, stopping right in front of us, then restarting where we first heard them. We couldn't stand hearing a third repeat, so we picked up our shit and hauled towards the car and then left immediately for a different campsite a few miles away. The thing that scarred me. And this story happened last year during the first month of school. My friend and I decided to bring our guitars, and we should play in the garage. My friend and I both play guitar, and we are in a band. We were also at my grandmother's house the day we did this, but it was also my uncle's birthday. My friend and I ended up playing guitar for about 6 or 7 hours. My uncle invited a ton of his friends, but they ended up staying inside due to the noise we were making. My little cousin wanted to play hide and seek/tag, a mix of the two. My friend and I chose not to go in with my family because they were drinking. My parents were the only people not drinking inside. But they didn't want to come off as rude, so they stayed inside and had to deal with my aunt, grandma and uncle's friends. We played for about 30 minutes until we played the one match that would scar us all. Keep in mind my cousin was 5 at the time, so it affected him badly. My grandma lives near train tracks where there have been multiple killings and suicides. That was the first place my friend and I decided to hide. We decided to stay up there for about 5 minutes until he found us and tagged us. He found us, and we sprinted off. I ran in the garage. And my friend ran through the alleyway. This was the worst mistake. Not me hiding in the garage or my friend running down the alley. My cousin was next to the garage, and I feared I would be discovered, but then I heard my friend running. My cousin said, "Get over here," but after saying that, we heard what can only be described as murder screams. But after those screams we all heard my cousin's mom screaming at him to go up to the train tracks. "Hey, we'll call him James, James, come up the hill." I found them. I, being scared, ran out of my hiding spot and grabbed him. I screamed at my friend, "Hurry, let's get out of here." We ran to the house, and we saw my aunt was out sitting in a chair by the table and drinking a beer. I know what she looks like after screaming. Her neck turns bright red after screaming, and her neck was still a normal tan color. My heart sank to my stomach, and I walked back outside, sat down on the grass, and started thinking harder than I have ever thought before. It was not her. The first thought that came to my mind was, who did that? It must be a prank. Was that a ghost or a phantom? Thereafter, we told everyone, and they believed me. My uncle said he heard someone screaming up there, and when he ran up there was no one there. My mom made us grab our stuff and leave early because she could tell we were not comfortable there anymore. She told us that somewhere in 1999 to 2006, that was the greatest place to throw deceased bodies and people who end themselves. They eventually broke the tracks to prevent anyone from using the train for disposal or people ending themselves. Cars that vanish while following you? I feel stupid writing this, but I wondered if anyone else has this experience that seems to happen somewhat often to me. I will share the most striking example I can recall, although it is somewhat dated, 15 to 20 years ago. Similar incidents occur to me at least a couple of times each year. Driving home from class, on a long, boring back road, a road I knew like the back of my hand, driving it every day for 3 years at that point. The road was a bit twisty and hilly, but it featured one long straight stretch where you could see for over a mile, with no driveways or side roads along it, followed by a sharp curve. I'd usually gun it along that section, then slow down right before the curve. Once, I had a car following me, no one I knew, nothing at all out of the ordinary, just an old beater and obviously not a cop. It kept up with me along the straightaway, then I went around the corner and lost sight of it for a second. I watched my mirror for 2 seconds. 5 seconds. 10 seconds, still no car? I seriously thought, at that point, it must have trusted my speed as safe and not known about the curve. I felt awful and screeched to a halt to go back and help some poor bastard who must have failed to make the turn and gone off the road, although I should have seen them in my mirror if they had. 30 seconds, tops, before I get back to seeing around the curve. No car in sight. There was no wreck just past the bend, and there was no path of destruction through the brush where a car could have gone. The brush wasn't thick enough to hide a car if it had gone off into it. Now, I describe this as a nice long stretch of straight road, but it was a backwoods country road. You could possibly push 80 on it if you didn't value your life much, and I say that from my perspective at the time as a stupid early 20-something who considered himself effectively immortal. Getting to the 120 plus that it would have taken to get out of sight, not to mention the time to stop and turn around from 50-ish? Not happening. I just stopped my car, got out, and listened for a few minutes trying to figure out where it could have gone. Nothing. I got back in the car and crawled along that stretch of road at about 5 miles per hour, up and down a few times, looking for any hidden turnouts or mostly overgrown driveways I may have missed in my years of driving past. Nothing. As I originally mentioned, I have this happen to me once or twice a year. Nothing as obvious as what I describe above, though. Cars behind me just vanish after I go around a curve, or sometimes even just over a blind hill, with no realistic place for them to have gone. I can't remember it ever happening before the above event, but I attribute that to just never noticing it until it happened in such a glaringly obvious way. I've told people about this, but they always just laugh and make jokes about how much weed I must have smoked back in college. Won't deny that, but I never drive intoxicated, on anything, for the record. Has anyone else ever experienced this? I figure if anyone has, this channel seems like the right place to ask. My entire extended family is seeing these, but I moved from the family land. Does anyone have an opinion about their description? I have always felt that the wooded land where my family resides is haunted, and this perception is shared by the rest of my family as well. Essentially, my great-grandparents and grandparents each had a house there. The children of the latter eventually took over the former. Currently, someone resides in a camper on the property, and there is a continuous flow of visitors passing through. It resembles a compound inhabited by somewhat old-fashioned rural and low-income individuals, where relatives frequently crash on the couch or need to stay, and I witnessed a ghost as a child, with many other family members experiencing similar sightings. However, it's not uncommon to encounter traditional ghostly phenomena, such as the presence of a looming figure in a room. This is East Texas, by the way, and I am hesitant to consider Skinwalker because their location appears to be in the West, where different tribes were present. East Texas has its legends. This area is super creepy, as do the Cherokee that were here, but I wonder if anyone had any advice on the regional aspects. Anyways, I moved away, and now my family members describe something much stranger and more overt and perhaps darker. We used to say the ghosts were good spirits. My grandma saw what she described as an albino set of legs with a sort of deformed torso/head combination. My uncle saw an elongated super tall figure. My cousin saw something humanoid crawling on the barn outside her window. And everyone hears voices in the woods, children's voices, and what they said sounded like birds singing human songs like "Here Comes the Bride" and "Happy Birthday." Even our neighbors, when asked, were like, "Yeah, we know there's something out there." My grandmother also asserts that she observes a black hole emerging at a specific location, and she sent me a photograph that purportedly depicts this phenomenon. However, the image appears somewhat distorted or glitch-like. According to her, this is an accurate representation, suggesting that it is indeed some form of rift in her perception. My grandma also has claimed to have been abducted by aliens years ago. She admits it could have been some kind of sleep paralysis, but she did have to go to the hospital for a heart attack from it, and it makes me curious about the lore of some interconnected quality between the two phenomena. An intriguing twist to this: my grandfather used to dig up pottery and arrowheads where an Indian camp used to be down in the woods. Then he had alcoholism-induced schizophrenia, called Wernicke-Korsakoff, basically permanent delirium tremens, where he would hallucinate all kinds of stuff, including Native Americans, probably because they interested him. Now the latter has medical reasoning, but as a big David Lynch fan who was dealing with a lot of grief over his illness, he raised me. My mom herself is mentally unwell from a head injury, which is a whole other hallucination-laden story. I often found myself wondering if we had some kind of shining situation, if there was something specific to my family, whether he activated something with the digging, etc., etc. Like it was extremely difficult not to imagine this grander cosmology. Which my much more country family totally believes, whereas I try to be more skeptical, especially because I have only seen the childhood ghost and yet feel in my gut the reality of the situation. All of this, by the way, got much worse seemingly after he died, like the family really started seeing things after, and such a significant part of his hallucinations were concerned with protecting the house from these sort of evil figures he'd see. I also experimented with psychedelics and DMT when I was younger, which makes me more inclined to believe in the supernatural. I just personally haven't seen anything as an adult except how awful the vibes are at that house/land. Everyone, including me, knows the sensation of being watched on that plot of land, not to mention my family has luck so bad that we call it a curse, and when a new wife or husband is introduced, after a few years they're shocked to realize we really do seem cursed lol. Anyone got any takes on this? Does it sound believable or familiar, or is my family just all crazy because they are otherwise? Addiction, mental health issues, and it's spilled over into a collective psychosis, lol. Does anyone have experience with more wooded areas east of the traditional West and skinwalkers? Because other tribes have their versions, but the albino nature sounds basically exactly like one. Future time slip in Australia. I live in Australia, and at the age of 23, I traveled from Sydney in one state to the Sunshine Coast in another. At that time, the highway was pretty much a single lane, passing through most towns. During my holiday on the sunny coast, I overheard some people talking of the great time-cutting bypass around Newcastle, which is quite a large city. I was excited to try it on the way back, assuming that I must have missed the exit on my way up the coast, as I tended to be a bit of a daydreamer, listening to my music up loud. Anyway, I made sure I paid close attention on my way back, and some distance outside a small town called Raymond Terrace, sure enough, there was my bypass. It was terrific. It must have cut my time by about an hour. Some months later, I traveled back up the coast for a holiday with my then partner. It was shortly after the Newcastle earthquake, because we both made mention of what was happening on the news. It was another great time-saving trip there and back. It wasn't until later when we had an argument with someone regarding the new Newcastle bypass, who was adamant that it didn't exist and was only in the planning stage, that I suppose we kind of wondered who was the crazy one, because we knew it was there. I had personally driven on it 3 times, twice with my partner. The next time we went up the coast on holiday, we couldn't find the bypass exit. We even ended up turning around to try and find it, but it wasn't there. It wasn't until years later that the bypass exit was created in the area where we had driven. So I suppose the question is, did we experience a time slip or alternate universe, or was it an act of consciousness? I truly believe the road existed, and so it did, to the extent that I passed my belief to my partner, who in turn shared in the experience. It wasn't until I began to doubt its reality that the road disappeared. I don't know. I'm unsure if this is paranormal or just plain weird. This happened to my friend and her husband last night, and I told them I'd share for them, so here is what she has to say. Something weird happened last night, and we're still trying to make sense of it. Around 10 p.m., my husband spilled water on his desk and docking station, so we were cleaning everything up when we heard a faint sound coming from somewhere nearby. After a few moments of confusion, we realized it was coming from his work headset, an older Jabra business USB headset plugged into his work laptop, which was locked at the time. Just to note, this laptop blocks all non-business websites and only has work-related software installed. There was no video or audio playing in any open browser tab or program, and no background apps running that could have produced sound. He tried changing the Windows audio settings to be fully muted, swapping output to laptop speakers, and checking for any hidden processes in the task manager, but the audio continued playing through the headset. We could clearly hear a woman's voice saying, "Leave me. Give me my baby. Give her back to me. Bring me my child. Give her to me. Give her." This clip would continuously loop, beginning where you hear the static noise. There appeared to be something else with her that didn't quite sound human. Whatever it was, it screamed in what almost sounded like a broken language, possibly primal or ancient, but unrecognizable. This sounded like something straight out of a horror movie or game, but we have no idea where it came from. The sound kept looping for about 20 minutes, and then, without us doing anything specific, it just stopped. We've tried to see if this matches anything from known media, like video games or movies, but we've come up empty. If anyone recognizes this or has experienced something similar, we'd appreciate any input. We live in a suburb north of Dallas, Texas, in a mobile home park in a built-up housing area. A few winters ago, when we'd had a nice little snowfall, my wife and I went shopping. Our home is at the end of the first street into the park. As we pulled up to our house, we noticed footprints across our yard, big ones, and a pile of droppings. They definitely were not dog tracks or horse tracks. We took some pics, which I have stored somewhere but can't find now, and looked them up online. They were moose tracks. The droppings were moose droppings. The tracks just started in the middle of the yard, made a straight line across the yard, and then just vanished about a yard from the back fence. They didn't veer off anywhere, they just stopped. We asked the neighbors if they'd seen anything odd, no one saw anything. To be fair, it was cold, and not many were outside unless they had to be. There's a nature area nearby, but there are no moose there, this is Texas. Besides, to reach our yard, it would have had to wander in through the front gate, wander up a street for 4 blocks, turn into our yard, walk across the yard, and then go back to the street and out the way it came. There's a fence around the entire park, and the tracks, as I say, just appear in the middle of the yard and then vanish just as suddenly. We never have solved this. Paranormal experience, phantom hand grips my leg. Hi everyone, I just wanted to share my experience. I, 22 male, had a true paranormal incident at my friend's, 22 female, house back in 2019. At that time, I was in 12th grade and had a close friend whom I will refer to as P. We attended the same pre-university college and took the same bus every morning. She and I became close over time, and we started to talk about personal things like her secrets, traumas, etc. She was a somewhat disturbed kid for her age, and I remember her being much more emotionally mature than I was in most situations. You could tell that she had a traumatic childhood and was going through some trouble at home. As we got closer, she revealed to me that she had asthma and eczema, and that is why she couldn't wear certain clothes. We had a standard uniform for college, and she would always seem to wear different textured clothes. She revealed to me that when she was a kid, there was a big fire that engulfed her house, and as a result, she had developed these 2 conditions. She went on to say that when she was a 12-year-old kid, that is, during 2015, there lived a maid below the house in the servants' quarter who was into witchcraft and black magic, particularly Indian tantric stuff, with chilies and lemons and other things. Now mind you, her house is pretty big. We are talking about big Indian ancestral property. It was this giant bungalow with tall compound walls and a whole basement dedicated to the maid's quarters. They also had 2 Labrador dogs, which were quite big. P's house was massive, to say the least. So this maid was unhappy with her pay and had a few major disputes with the house owner over a bunch of things, with the owner accusing her of flicking things around the house. These differences boiled over to such an extent that one day the maid performed black magic in the basement, her quarters, stole money from the house, set it on fire, and ran away. P was trapped in her room in the middle of the night and narrowly escaped the fire but was left with asthma and eczema. So one day, I visited her house out of curiosity, and her house became our friend group's hangout spot for a while. However, whenever I was there, I found this creepy vibe to be present all the time, and I never liked the general atmosphere in the house. So one day we all were supposed to meet at her place, and I had gotten there a bit early and asked if she could show me the basement where the black magic had happened. She said that it wasn't a good idea to go there and that her dogs themselves refused to enter that area of the house. Still, I insisted on seeing it, so she showed me a staircase at the edge of her living room that led down into the basement. She came with me to the entrance, and I started to take a few steps down. As I started to descend, I felt very heavy each time I took a step down. A few more steps down, my socks felt wet and soggy and heavy. The next step I took shook me. As I put my foot down, I felt this icy cold wet hand rise up from the ground and grab my ankles and pull my leg down to the ground. At that time, I shrieked like a 12-year-old girl and ran back up the staircase. Mind you, the incident was all within 6 to 8 steps down the staircase. So at that point, I pussied out and decided not to go down there, as I didn't want to deal with this shit. Also, when we entered her house, right above her door there was this big black charring on the wall. That was the char that was left behind by the fire. I asked her why she wouldn't get it repainted or at least tended to. She said that no matter what she did, and how many times she repainted, the same chair used to appear. They called a pundit to do some rituals, but it wouldn't go away. Help make some sense of this. I work at a restaurant in a big city. Tonight I worked a longer shift than usual, and I had a very strange encounter. We started getting a tad busier than usual right around the time I was supposed to leave. The other person I work with is a great server and was serving the new tables as they came in. So I was helping her out when she needed something. I was watching her run around when I noticed a woman in her mid-40s sitting at our furthest booth. She had kind eyes and smiled at me, so I smiled back and started pouring a water for her since I had a feeling the other server hadn't seen her yet. I went to grab a menu and bring her the drink when I realized she was gone. I looked all over the entire restaurant, which is relatively small, looking for her. I asked the other server if she saw her get up, and she said no one had been sitting there. I asked our hostess, and she said a woman hadn't walked in alone recently, and especially not one that fit the description. I asked our manager if he had seen her, and he also said no. The server ended up asking a table that was sitting nearby where I saw her, and both people agreed not a single person had been sitting behind them for a while. I felt insane. I still feel insane. I even asked my manager if we could look at the cameras and see if a woman came to sit down. But not only was this phantom woman sitting in one of our only blind spots, but the system we use wasn't working to go back to that time frame anyway. What do you all think? I'm trying to make some sense of this. If it was paranormal, I didn't feel frightened at all. She seemed kind, and I felt like going out of my way to get to her before my coworker so she wouldn't have to wait long. Mr. Hat Man. My first paranormal experience. My very first encounter with the paranormal was when I was 5. I was lying in bed, which was in the corner opposite of the wall my door was on. One night I woke up and didn't really know why. I looked around my room, and my eyes landed on my open door. Against the door was a shadow of a tall man with a trench coat and hat on, like someone from the 40s. I felt instant terror at being watched by this thing. It just stood there, and while there were no discernible features, I knew it was looking at me, and whatever its intent was, it was not good. I let out a loud scream and burst into tears when my mom came rushing into the room. I told her what I saw, and she did her best to convince me it was just a shadow being cast by my curtains. I apparently believed her at the time and went back to sleep. I have never forgotten what happened and can remember everything in vivid detail. Years later I asked my mom if she remembered what I had seen as a child, and she got this scared look on her face. She told me that she did remember, and she tried to convince me that the curtains were to blame because I had freaked her out, and she knew that this kind of thing runs in the family. I decided one day to look up what I saw in hopes of an explanation. I regret doing that. Here is what I found out. Of all the shadow people that visit you at night, the Hat Man may be the creepiest. He's been spotted all over the world and has apparently been around for a while. According to creepy stories about the Phantom Hat Man, he appears during times of emotional turmoil or distress and will often observe you as you sleep. While many people are unable to make out what he is wearing, some report seeing old-fashioned clothing, a long trench coat, or a cape, and he always appears at least 6 feet tall and always wears a hat. The Hat Man's face is also usually indistinguishable, but many whom he has visited have claimed he has glowing red eyes. People who claim the Hat Man has attacked them tell stories about being jumped on or choked and have experienced burning in their chest or tingling on their scalp. He tends to stay longer than most shadow people as well and has been spotted watching people in the mirror, bending over them while they sleep, or just hanging out in the corner with a creepy smile on his face. Many have also noted a very dark energy emitted from him and said they immediately knew he was extremely evil and very likely wanted to kill them. Many encounters people recount have taken place in bedrooms or basements, and many witnesses have met the Hat Man when they were children. Thankfully, I have never seen him again, and I pray I never do. Joshua Tree, California. A weird experience. So a couple of months ago my partner and I went out to Joshua Tree for about a week after we drove down to LA for a concert. We've been to JT 4 or 5 times, so we aren't strangers to desert life. This is a lengthy story filled with many strange events that collectively contribute to a significant amount of oddness, but I can state with complete certainty that everything that occurred actually happened, and I have someone who can corroborate it all. The house we stayed in was south of JT, bordering the park at the base of a massive rock piling/mountain. It was about half a mile from the main highway, and the nearest house that I saw people in was about 1,000 to 1,500 feet away. I only encountered other individuals on the final day of our stay there, assuming it is another Airbnb. So we get into the Airbnb just as the sun was setting, and immediately the house just felt kind of off. Not bad, just wrong. We unpacked, and neither said anything at this point, but as the clock hit about 10 p.m., the vibe in the house totally shifted from weird to bad, like scary. We both felt like we were being watched, and the air just felt heavy. We went to bed and woke up the next day, things felt pretty much fine again. Cool. We go about our day and end up back at the house again just as the sun is setting, make dinner, 10 p.m. hits, and the vibe shifts. I can't sleep this time, so my partner goes to bed, and I stay up in the living room, writing and scrolling on my phone, and then at about 3 a.m., I hear whistling. Not just a few brief wind whistles, I'm referring to 6 seconds of a song being whistled by someone outside. It came from outside, and after testing it the next morning, it must have been right outside the living room because you couldn't hear whistling beyond 15 to 20 feet from the window. Anyway, I go into immediate fight or flight mode and sit up awake until the sun comes up with my pistol at my side. The next morning, I'm freaked out. I go look outside in the sand, and there are no footprints. I test for the whistle volume and realize it must have been close. We do, however, find on the opposite side of the house some rather large paw prints. The only thing is, there didn't look like back legs. Maybe it was walking so cinched up that it was stepping in its own paw tracks? I don't know. There were also clearly coyote tracks up the driveway that were older, and you could see 4 clear prints. So these large prints came down out of the rock hill behind the house and went right up to the Airbnb's side door into the bedroom and then vanished. Zip, nada, didn't turn around, didn't circle, didn't find them further out like it had jumped, just goddamn vanished. This still freaks me the hell out. As we're leaving for the day, trying to figure out what the hell I heard and what the actual duck is up with the tracks, my partner calls me from the other side of the house. A roadrunner showed up out of nowhere, my partner looked down, and it was just there. Standing right next to them. It looked off again. The bird had a crossed beak, a mangy appearance, and huge eyes that were constantly scanning everything. It's like when you look at an animal and can see what they're thinking. This bird was sentient. It was the strangest feeling. We thought it was sick or injured because of the beak and called a wildlife rehab place, who told us to catch it if we could to bring it to them, so we tried for a while, but it was just always a little too fast. It stayed in the area, however, despite our clear attempts to chase it. It would just get out of our path and wait there until we got close again. We left it uncaptured and spent the day doing stuff. We decided to spend most of the night out to avoid the house but finally ended up back well after 10 p.m., and the vibe was again heavy. I had found some spare sheets and had covered all the windows that didn't have blinds, which helped a little bit, but the feeling of being watched just wouldn't go away. That night again I was restless and in the living room and again heard a whistle. This time only 2 short little whistles, but they had the same human-like tone to them that the first did. I also heard strange rustling outside that night, so I again stayed up until the sun came up. Went outside, couldn't find a damn sign of anybody. No animal tracks either. We spent that day at the house just trying to relax, and just as late afternoon turned into evening, the roadrunner showed up again. I take the chance to try and catch it again, but it's just too fast. But this time it's doing this thing. It would run maybe 10 feet and stop. Turn around and look at me with its huge eyes, and just wait. Just wait for me to get close enough to grab it and then do the same thing. Over and over and over again. Before I knew it, I looked up, the sun was starting to set, and I was almost standing in the foothills of this rocky mountain. The bird led me into the foothills away from the house, and I was too focused on catching it to notice. I realized where I was and thought to myself, okay, nope, this is weird, so I turned around. And the bird followed me and tried to, get my attention, like it wanted me to follow it still. I have never had a wild animal do this to me ever. I got back to the house, and the roadrunner was just sitting at the top of the driveway towards the hills, just watching us. I felt unnerved, and this is when it really hit me how sentient that thing felt. I know that it knew what it was doing. I can't explain it beyond that. We slept that night, and things were mostly quiet. We left the next morning, and as we took the trash out to the dumpster 100 from the house, we noticed a single human footprint in the sand at the dumpster. No boot/shoe prints leading to it, no bare footprints either. Just one single human footprint in the sand. And if any of you are familiar with the area, you understand that nobody walks barefoot there. It's spider hole, scorpion den, and snake country. Additionally, the rocks and cactus quills would make walking there quite uncomfortable. Anyway, and then we left. That's really it, just a bunch of weird things that left us feeling really shaken. My hair is literally on end right now as I type all of this. We looked into it later and read something about that area being notorious for skinwalker encounters and folklore. I really knew nothing about them before and still know very little now. So take this for what it's worth. This was not in any way fiction, and I swear on my life that it all happened as I told it. Thanks for listening. The Phantom Customers. I delivered pizza for probably 2 years or so at a local chain in my town. In that time, I've had a lot of weird things happen to me, ranging from innocent interactions like a guy telling me to watch that Poochie, he's goofy when his dog barks, to a crackhead answering the door in their underwear and offering me weed. This, however, was the weirdest experience I ever had. It was a Friday or Saturday lunch rush, and we were steady with deliveries. I took 2 deliveries, one close in town and another that was a bit further out. I went to the first place, which was in a weird part of town. Not exactly sketchy, but strange. I pulled up onto the street and started checking the house numbers, and the place I'm looking for just isn't there. I get out and start looking around, literally walking around this whole street looking like an idiot. This house just is not there. I called the customer's number, and they answered briefly, but there was this static that was so strong I couldn't understand anything they said, and eventually they cut out altogether. Where the house should have been was a hill that sloped down to another street. I even walked down there, still nothing. I called the shop and explained the situation. My boss told me to take the other delivery, and she would call the customers. While I was driving back towards town, my boss called me and said she got the same thing I did, weak voices that were so muffled you couldn't understand anything. I still have no idea what the hell happened that day, and I never had anything like that happen again. True Glitch, and the Phantom Car. This happened about 6 years ago, a few days after I graduated high school, but I still remember it pretty damn well, also because I've been telling people about this incident for 6 years. This is a little wordy. My friend, Roger, and I were driving to another friend's house, Tom. I was in the passenger seat, and Roger was driving down a 4-lane, 2 each way, suburban road that serves as the main line to several different neighborhoods. We were heading north to Tom's house. A white SUV with a bike rack on top passed by us on the other side of the road, going south. I didn't make much note of it, but Roger, who was driving about 55 on this 35 road, kind of sighed and said that he thought it was a cop. We stop at a stop sign a few hundred feet later and start to move when another white SUV with a bike rack passes by us heading south, and Roger and I get quiet. Roger said to me, "Dude, that was the same car that just passed us." I just kind of laugh and go, "I know, that's so freaky." And Roger was like, "No, I know it was, because I thought it was a cop, so I took a good look at both of them. I swear it was the same car." So, that was the first thing that happened that night, and it freaked us out pretty seriously, but we just forgot about it after smoking hookah and playing video games at Tom's house. Afterwards, Roger is giving me a ride home, and we're going down a main road in town, but seeing as it was around 2 a.m., there was little traffic. We pull into the left turn indentation of the median to turn into my neighborhood from this main road, but 2 cars are heading towards us on the other side of the road, so we wait for them to pass. The first car, in their left lane, was a good car length ahead of the other car when it passed us, but the second car was suddenly gone. Roger didn't attempt to turn. He just sat there in the left turn lane and asked me if I saw the second car. I told him, yeah, it was definitely there. We both saw the headlights. But for some reason, it just disappeared. He turned into my neighborhood and parked in my driveway, and we remembered the white SUV from earlier that night. He joked that he was too afraid to drive home, but we mutually agreed that it was definitely a crazy night. The family keeps seeing a ghost that looks like me around the house. So first I have to explain the story as best as I can. Basically my family and I moved into this house a while ago, maybe like 8 years or so, but ever since we moved out, my family swears they keep seeing things around the house. I've actually moved out with my boyfriend not that long ago, but I still visit very often. Very specifically, my family thinks they see a ghost around the house that looks exactly like me, and it's freaking me out. And I know it's not me that they're seeing, because the times when they see this ghost don't make sense, and sometimes I'm not even home. It's happened a couple of times, but I'll just write down a few examples. The first time it happened I was playing on the computer in my parents' room when I noticed my mom walk down the hallway to my room. She called out my name, and I asked her what's up. She came out really confused, because according to her, she had followed me all the way from the kitchen into my closet in my room. When she got to the closet, there was no one there. I had been on the computer the whole time. I was even on it when I saw her pass her room to go into my own. When she told me this, it really freaked me out, and I just told her I would rather not keep talking about it. I get scared super easily. The second time I was helping mom out with groceries. She was in the garage bringing bags in, and I was in the kitchen putting everything up. While I was putting something up, she came in all mad, saying that she was struggling to get some bags and I was just standing beside her watching her struggle. But that wasn't me. Apparently, I was watching her struggling to pick up some bags from the truck floor, and when she turned around to ask me for help, I just stared her down. Again, that really scared me. Another time, my dad was telling me about something that happened when he was taking care of my sisters while my mom and I were out. Now, my dad does not believe in any kind of ghosts or supernatural things. But apparently, while taking care of my sisters, my dad heard what sounded like someone trying to open the sliding door that leads to the backyard. He immediately got up and went to check on the door to make sure no one wanted to break in or something. But when he got there, the door was shaking by itself, very violently. It looked like someone was trying really hard to open the door, and had the lock been on the other side to keep it closed, the door would have slid open. It stopped after a few seconds when my dad got there. Even my dad got scared, and I've never seen him this freaked out before. My 2 little sisters also heard the door. Now I had personally never had a supernatural experience in the house, but a few weeks before I moved out, I was home alone. I was taking a shower, and I heard a huge bang. It sounded like the front door had been swung open, and then after that it started sounding like someone was opening and closing doors and cabinets. I was so scared because it sounded like someone had broken into the house. I was defenseless and in the freaking shower, so I got out of the shower, grabbed my phone, and called my mom crying, all the while doors and cabinets were still opening and closing. My dad got onto the cameras they have in the house, and they didn't see anyone. There was no one in the house, and nothing was being moved around. It stopped after my dad said that through the phone. Those are some of the examples of what goes on. It terrifies me to think that one day I could possibly be staring right at someone who looks exactly like me in the middle of the night. I've never seen her, and I don't want to. What could it mean that the ghost looks exactly like me? Phantom husband. This just happened, and as with all glitches, my heart is racing. My husband left for an appointment a couple of hours ago, expecting, as usual, to be gone until noon. About 10 minutes ago, I was sitting in my home office at the computer when I heard either the front door or garage to laundry room door open. The little dog scrambled in excitement, as usual, and I heard my husband greet one of the dogs using the distinct pet nickname he always uses. The greeted dog started his usual little yips of return greeting. I got up to greet him, planning to say, that was a fast trip, but when I got to the area where I could see the living room, kitchen, and laundry room, a fairly small house, just a few steps to here, no one was there. The dogs were still pacing and checking doors. I think to myself, maybe he came in, emptied his arms, and went back out to the garage to get more. So I opened the laundry to garage door and no car. Confused, I think maybe he parked in the driveway, and I heard the front door. The front door is still locked. Dogs looking confused and following me around as I checked the rest of the house. No husband. So I called him. He's still an hour away and not done with errands. Phantom husband. I heard it, the dogs heard it. Now I need a drink. Phantom/ghost animal experiences? I've been searching for answers for so long. My friend and I would walk through these woods behind this construction site. We're country boys from upstate NY, so the woods wasn't scary or odd to us. However, this particular patch of woods gave us this strange feeling when we walked through it. It was a feeling of both being watched and protected. The feeling was so powerful that we kept returning in hopes of seeing something strange. We never did. One day he and I were taking a shortcut through a different woods to get home from one of our other friends' houses. This was only about 500 feet or so. I got the same feeling that I haven't experienced anywhere else besides that other woods. I didn't say anything. While we were walking down the trail, my friend points off to the side and goes, Dude, look. And about 25 feet away from us was a 6 feet tall, black, crow-like creature sitting on a stump. Now normally, I would have tried to get as close as possible to something like this and tackle it and make my buddy take a picture. But this thing looked like a hole cut in space in the shape of a bird. It looked like that Vanna Black material. We just looked at it for a while and then kept walking. Not saying much. We spoke about it later. He said he saw a dog or a wolf type thing. I said it was a bird. I know it was a bird. The part that weirded me out the most looking back on it was how I reacted to it. I would have taken a picture or tried to get closer or talk to it or something. But it, wiped my brain for a second. I felt more at peace and not threatened by it, if anything. Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? I've been looking for answers for so long. Phantom drumming. In 2018 we, my husband, myself, and our 2.5-year-old daughter, had sold our home in Wilmington, North Carolina. We were living with his parents in Rocky Point, North Carolina, in their garage apartment while we searched for a home to purchase. Their home is situated on about 70 acres of land. A good amount of this land is rented to farmers who alternate growing things like wheat, corn, and soybeans. There are thick areas of woods behind their home and surrounding the crop fields. My 2.5-year-old and I would take walks through the area of woods directly behind their house, as a walking trail had been made from years of walking this same path. This was only a tiny fraction of the woods. The rest was not easily accessible. During the time we lived there, Hurricane Florence came through. Having grown up in the area, we were all familiar with hurricanes and were not concerned once it was downgraded to a Category 1. We assumed it would be like every other hurricane we've dealt with before. Some wind and rain for a few hours followed by bright skies and extreme humidity. Florence was different, though. It stalled out over the area and rained huge amounts of rain for 3 days straight. We were very fortunate in that my in-laws' property, although near parts of the river, was situated higher than surrounding areas. Many parts nearby flooded, and the floodwaters became so high that the occupants had to be rescued from their roof by helicopter. We were trapped on the property for almost 2 weeks. We could drive down their half-mile driveway to Highway 210 but then couldn't go more than 1/4 of a mile in either direction before running into flooded areas of the road. During these 3 days of non-stop rain from Florence, it felt as if we'd never see the sun again. On the 4th day we woke up to the sun and bright blue skies. My 2.5-year-old and I immediately went outside to feel the sun on our skin. We had only been out for a few minutes when we heard drumming coming from what sounded like the woods lining the fields to the right of the house. There were at least 3 plots of fields on this side, so the woods were a pretty good distance away. There is a drainage ditch with a footbridge separating their yard from the first part of the first field. There is a lot of overgrowth surrounding the ditch, but you can still see the fields and woods through where the footbridge is. There wasn't anything planted at the time, so the fields were bare. With the woods being so far away, I was surprised at how well the sound carried. It was a rhythmic drumming like bum 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 bum, and then a pause, and then the most primal sounding scream. My daughter and I both froze, and she immediately said she wanted us to go back inside. While it had surprised me, I wasn't frightened because it had to have been far away considering I couldn't visually see anything and the woods were a great distance away. After that scream, the same drumming started again but sounded closer. It was the same beat followed by the same pause and then a primal guttural scream. It continued like this about 5 times, sounding closer and closer each time. I was feeling progressively creeped out by the way it was getting closer, but my curiosity overrode my fear. I kept waiting for something to appear out of the woods or near the footbridge. The 6th time the drumming sounded as if it were coming from the ditch by the footbridge, but nothing was there. It seemed so close. Then the pause. And then the scream. But the scream sounded as if some invisible person was standing right in front of us and screaming. Yet nothing was there. At this point my 2.5-year-old lost it and started crying to go inside. I scooped her up swiftly and took us in. It took all of probably 5 seconds after that scream because my curiosity was gone and I was officially terrified. And that was it. Once we were inside, the rhythmic drumming and screaming stopped. When I tried talking to my in-laws and husband about what we heard, they all shrugged it off as sound carrying funny. I brought up the fact that most of the surrounding land was flooded, so who would be out there drumming, and they didn't have an answer. My husband also talks nonchalantly about an old graveyard in the woods where his brothers and he would play around as kids. I don't know what I heard. All I know is that it sounded as if it were right in front of me, and yet I couldn't see anything. My daughter doesn't have a ton of memories from that age, but she does remember the drumming. A phantom version of my brother lives in my house? So, this has been going on for some time now, though I notice it less now since I'm at school a lot. Just a note, I've looked into doppelgangers in various versions, and it doesn't seem to fit. I currently live with my mom and brother. All of our rooms are adjacent to each other. My room is in the corner of the house, and my brother's room is on my right, and my mom's is on the left. When I moved in, I wasn't going to school or work, so I was home most of the time. My brother works weird hours since his job is based on workload, so sometimes he leaves at 6 a.m., other days he leaves at 10 a.m. One day, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed, which is next to my door, and I hear his doorknob rattle. I knew that he had gone to work, so I was startled, so were my two cats, who were wide-eyed and wouldn't move. Which freaked me out. I'm very paranoid, so my first thought is that someone might be in there, and I need a weapon. I'm too spooked to go see if his car is in the driveway, so I text him to ask if he is home. He said he was at work. I sat there for a long while and didn't hear anything, so it must have been random. I go out to the kitchen to make some food and head back to my room. I notice from the partially open drapes that someone is coming towards my house. It's my brother. He is bolting towards the front door. I was shocked and thought, oh wow, he must have been worried and came home to check on me. He never came in the front door. His car wasn't there. I went to my room, locked the door, and ate/slept, thinking maybe I was hallucinating from lack of sleep or something. I didn't see him anymore, but I heard someone in his room all the time. I legitimately thought he had someone staying in the room or someone maybe coming in through his window. All I knew is that no one was home but me, and his room sounded like someone was moving around. I started school and was out of the house for most of the day, 5 days a week, so when I got home, he was already there and then was home on the weekends, so I didn't have any problems after that. A few months went by, and I saw him again, where he couldn't have been. I was coming home from a friend's house at night and was pulling up to the driveway. His car windows are a little dark, but you can still see in them. I saw his silhouette in the front seat, drinking something. He goes to 7-Eleven a bunch, so I figured he had just gotten back from there and was about to head inside. I parked and walked towards the front door and flipped him off, because we have a loving bond like that. I go inside and mill about the kitchen, but I don't hear him come inside. I look down the hallway, and his bedroom light is off. My mom is in the living room watching TV, and I ask her where he is, and she tells me he has been sleeping for hours. So, I saw him once while he was at work and once when he was asleep. It's like there's this weird phantom version of him. I'm going to try to listen more closely when I am home and he is not. I don't know if there will be any activity since my mom is retired and home a lot. Note, I don't truly believe in the supernatural all that much, though I have had some chilling experiences, but I'm just so curious to know if anyone has ever had this happen or knows if there is a term for it. Phantom baby crying. I must admit that I have been slightly stressed, but not significantly more than usual. I got out of the Navy in 2023, and since then I have had 4 deaths in the family, including my mother-in-law-to-be, my sister-in-law's wedding, my wedding, 2 cross-country moves, a house renovation and sale, and a honeymoon baby. My husband is also still military, so he got orders across the country, which is the second move. The house we were supposed to rent turned out to be a technically legal but definitely unsafe house, and we had to get out of our lease. It was missing entire windows with winter coming, had exposed wiring, and was very unsanitary. I didn't feel safe staying there while pregnant, but our belongings were already packed in the moving truck and on the way. We redirected it to storage, and I moved in with my parents while we shifted gears to buying a house instead of renting. They lived in the state but 4.5 hours away from the base. My husband couch surfed with a coworker at this time. Then my parents left for an Australian cruise they had been planning for a few years. So I house/dog sat for them while they were gone because what else could I really do? My brother still lives at home, which is really fortunate because I suddenly had eclamptic seizures and delivered at 28 weeks. Military medical missed my preeclampsia, and I had to get a medevac, and my son was born at 2 pounds 3.6 ounces, he's happy and healthy now. So 3 months later we close on a nice little house, and our son comes home from the NICU. My parents helped us set up the house and settle in. My husband goes back to work, and my parents go home. So here's where things get weird. I hear phantom crying all the time. It's distant and vague. I ignore it because I'm sleep deprived and it's my first baby. I figure it's one of those many mental and physical changes people forget to tell you about when you have a baby. The baby monitor motion detector goes off when nothing is in the room. It has a camera, and the screen shows nothing has changed. Maybe the curtains moved? IDK, I have bigger fish to fry. The baby monitor starts reporting crying when the baby is asleep in my arms downstairs. I check the settings to make sure the mic isn't too sensitive and it's not picking up a lawn mower or something. The baby monitor starts crying on its own, like I hear the crying through the microphone. It sounds just like my son when he is gassy. When I check the screen, he is dead asleep, or he's in the room with me. It's a Wi-Fi monitor, so I changed our password in case somehow our neighbors had a baby without me knowing, and they've hooked up their baby monitor to our Wi-Fi by mistake, resulting in some kind of interference. I've been dealing with a lovely mental health cocktail of general anxiety and depression of a 20-something-year-old, postpartum, military-related PTSD, some kind of neurodivergence, and new mother jitters, amplified by the NICU experience. During this time, the baby was still eating every 2 or 3 hours, and he had an NG tube, so I just chalked it up to the very rational explanation that I was just crazy now. The baby is healthy, and I don't think I can take on ghosts or phantom babies until next financial quarter. So I schedule an appointment with a psychiatrist and go about my life. The other day my husband came home early, and my baby and I were trying to start a garden in the backyard. My husband comes out and asks why I'm leaving the baby upstairs alone and crying. But then he looks over and sees the baby right next to me. He's really confused because he definitely hears crying from upstairs and from the baby monitor. I'm like, "Oh, you hear that too?" I just assumed I was nuts. He went out and bought a fancy new monitor. Twice. We still get intermittent baby crying. It stops if I stick my head in the nursery and say something like, "Are you okay, sweetheart? Mama loves you." It's weird, but it's happening less frequently. We've adjusted. My ghost encounters in Jackson County, Mississippi. Let me start off by saying I've never had any mental problems that would cause me to hallucinate or see/hear things that aren't there. I've also been sensitive to energies and things of the unknown and supernatural. So here are just 2 of my encounters that happened a couple of weeks apart. I'll go ahead and set the scene for you. I was born and raised in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I am a 33-year-old female. We've had all kinds of strange, supernatural incidents here. The Phantom Barber of Pascagoula, the 1975 alien abduction, the haunted Longfellow House, and the legend of the Singing River. Do yourself a favor and look that one up. Hell, there was even a little-known murder of a local teacher on her lunch break by a man committing a ritualistic satanic sacrifice, but I digress. At any rate, I still live here. Pascagoula is in Jackson County, the farthest south in the state you can go. When someone thinks of Mississippi, the first thing people think of is backwoods and hicks. Pascagoula is not anything like that, it's a whole lot of suburbs. In fact, we are home to the largest employer in the state, Huntington Ingalls Shipbuilding. Anything south of Interstate 10 is full-on city, but the first incident took place in Helena. It's about 10 minutes from Pascagoula, and it sort of is in the middle of nowhere. Specifically, where I was, it was 5 minutes north of Interstate 10. I was in a small trailer park accommodating 5 small trailers far back off the road. If you were standing on the street, it looked like the driveway just went on into the woods. When I first moved there with my friend and roommate Stacy, an older male friend, being in the trailer gave me the creeps. It always felt like someone was watching me. Nothing serious, just a slight unease. Well, after about 8 months living there, my friend and her daughter came to stay with us while they looked for a place to live. The daughter was mixed, and her mom was white. This will be important later. Not long after they moved in, the activity picked up exponentially. Stacy never believed it, but V, her daughter who I was close with, we'll call her P, and I would see things. At first I thought I might be imagining things. That was until we saw the stuff at the same time. At first, I was seeing older and younger African American men for a nanosecond, and then they were gone. Then it started with the bathroom sink. I would hear it turn on and off again. I thought I was hearing things until one time I heard it, ran into the bathroom, and it was still on. I was home alone. Now, to set up the next part, I have to tell you how the house was set up. At one end was the kitchen, then the living room. Then from there, the hallway starts. My room was first, then the bathroom, and lastly was Stacy's room. P was in the kitchen, and I was in my room. I heard the bathroom sink turn on. Confused, I stuck my head out while calling for P, but as soon as I did, it turned off, and P walked to the hallway from the kitchen and said, "Yeah?" She was basically behind me. Trying to make sense of this, I asked, "Were you just in the bathroom?" Her eyes got big, and she said nervously, "No, I thought that was you." Now P is not easily scared. I've never known her to be scared of anything, But at that moment I could tell she was. A few days later, I had P take me in my car. I was too tired to drive, and it was about 10 p.m., to go to Walmart. My car was parked to the right of Stacy's, and when we went to pull out, we would make a 3-point turn. Because of this, the driver windows would be facing the back of his truck. Well, as we were about to put the gear in to drive from reverse, I reached to grab my purse from the floorboard of the driver's seat and just happened to look up. That's when I saw it. Next to Stacy's tailgate, it looked like a man sitting. A white man in a black hooded robe with a skull painted on his face. Let me remind you, we are in the middle of nowhere, in the woods. I didn't say a word. I just ducked down. Now staring at the inside of the driver's door. P started to ask what was wrong. What are you D? Oh my ducking god, and the windows are down. She threw it into drive, and we must have slung rocks all the way to the road. Now, my theory is that I know I'm sensitive, but from what I can tell, so is P. I also feel like someone who owned the land in the past may have sacrificed African American men and possibly children in some bizarre ritual, and when P moved in, it triggered something. I later told an old neighbor about the story. She turned white, and her jaw hit the floor. Stumbling over her words, she told me about how her young children used to ask her if they could go play with the black kids outside. There were no black kids around. Second encounter. About 2 weeks later, I had P take me, again, at night, to the St. Andrews area of Ocean Springs, Mississippi. It's only 2 towns away from Pascagoula. St. Andrews is vastly undeveloped with trees everywhere. The place I was going was on a road that had trees on one side and maybe one house on the other. Let's just say it's mostly woods. When we pulled up, she just pulled into the yard. I went inside to talk to my friend and borrow some money from him. When I came back out, the car was now parked parallel to the curb. I could see the majority of the car still from the porch, aside from the back windshield, as it was obstructed by a tree that was in my line of sight. I could see the front part and the trunk. I saw a figure standing by the driver's door, which I assumed to be P. Once my eyes adjusted, I could see it was an old white man. Red short-sleeved button-up and navy blue slacks. His gray and white hair was slicked back. He had his hand on my driver's door like he was trying to get in. Once I realized it wasn't P, I yelled, "Hey! What are you doing?" He turned to look at me and then started towards the back of the car, but once he walked behind the tree, he disappeared. Stunned but worried about my friend, I sprinted to the car. As I made it to the car, she unlocked the door while simultaneously jumping into the passenger seat. P was frantic, with no color in her face. I asked what happened. She managed to get out. He was trying to open the door. I asked where he came from. Without missing a beat, she replied with, "The woods, where'd he go?" I told her he disappeared behind the tree. All she could manage to articulate was, "Why does this keep happening to us?" It's been a few years now, and P and I don't really talk anymore. I think since we're both sensitive, together we attracted paranormal goings on. It's probably safer for both of us that we don't really hang out anymore. Ghost train in Georgia. When I was 8 to 10 years old, mid-1990s, my mom worked at a carpet company near Beaufort, Georgia. The building had a storefront where customers could walk through and look at samples, and in the back there was a huge warehouse where all kinds of flooring was stored. The loading/unloading area featured large bay doors that opened to a concrete lot, which was adjacent to an overgrown wooded area. Despite this, rural houses were scattered nearby, allowing glimpses of a few homes through the trees. Generally, the building always evoked a sense of unease in me, prompting me to run around the massive hanging carpets in the warehouse while my mom worked in the front. One day while I was waiting for my mom to get off work, the big bay doors were opened, so I went out in the loading area to play outside. After a few minutes, I heard what appeared to be a train approaching along the tracks. Of course, when you're a kid you get really excited about that stuff, so I ran out a little further in the loading lot, and sure enough I heard a train horn and could see a train coming down the tracks from the right of the building. I put my hand over my eyes to shield them from the sun so I could see better, and I watched this robin's egg blue and really shiny metal train coming down. I remember seeing a lot of rivets. At the time I called them screws because I didn't know what rivets were, on the train and windows that came down, not up, specifically. I saw people sitting in it, especially a lot of ladies with these kind of round-looking hats on, and a kid running down the middle of the train car. I saw a man smoking a pipe, and I remember thinking, must be in the smoking section. To give you a better idea, the front of the train was rounded, the cars were rectangular, and the robin's egg blue appeared in some details, such as one of the panels under each window, stripes going up the front, and a few other small areas, while the rest of the train was made of a really shiny looking metal. It seemed like one long train because the cars were attached really close together. I watched this train pass by and was really excited about it. It seemed like my mom came out almost right after it passed to tell me she was ready to leave, and I said, I saw the train. It just passed by. She was confused and told me there were no trains that passed there. I insisted that there was indeed a train, and I described everything I had observed about it. She said, there's no train that can even come back here. The train tracks end right down there. I seriously thought she was pulling my leg, and I said, ha ha, and ran down there. Sure enough, the train track ended just around a bend that was not visible from the parking lot. I swore to her I just saw that train pass by, and she swore I was making it up. As I thought about it, I couldn't really say I saw any specific facial features of the people on the train, though. I remembered the hats, the kid, and the pipe smoking, but couldn't even remember what their faces looked like. I dropped it because the tracks clearly ended, and a train couldn't have gone through. Recently, I brought it up to her and explained in detail the train I saw behind the building again. She thought I had made it up and couldn't believe the details I remembered all the years later, and kind of got spooked by it because she also felt creepy in the building occasionally. Black-eyed beings. 1979 to 1980, Washington, D.C. One night, in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C., around 1979 or 1980, I awoke in the very small hours of the morning with a feeling of absolute dread, and in the dark room, I could see nothing except a darker shadow standing not 3 feet away from the side of my bed. I could not see any definition to the shape. It was just a blacker shape of what I have always remembered as a human, perhaps in a black robe. No bare skin was visible. Indeed, it was just darkness, nothing more, but in human shape. I lay there absolutely terrified and filled with absolute certainty that if I moved or even breathed, something horrible would instantly happen to me. I have no recollection of how long I lay there, taking shallow breaths in the hope it wouldn't notice, but it seemed like several minutes. It never moved nor made any sound, but it radiated malevolent intent. Then, it slowly moved out of my room. And here is a radical departure from the recurring theme of needing to be invited. It left through the bedroom doorway, which I left open only a few inches ajar each night. I lay there for a few minutes, straining to hear the sound of someone exiting the apartment, ground floor, but I heard nothing. When the feeling of dread lifted a moment or so later, I quietly got out of bed, took a long-bladed hunting knife, and scoured my apartment. Nothing and no one was there except my sleeping roommate in his room. I slept with that knife under my pillow, unsheathed. For more than a month afterwards because of the terror I felt that night, but nothing similar has ever happened again in all these years, and I earnestly hope it never will revisit me. Never before or since in my life have I ever been so certain I was face to face with pure evil. However, I cannot explain why I felt this in the core of my being. Just 3 years ago, for the first time in my life, I got on the subject of the paranormal with a friend, a San Diego native who never moved from her hometown, i.e., an entire continent away from my experience, and she recounted a similar tale, although she awoke and could see a person who had black eyes and emanated evil. However, she did not sense a horrible death, just the presence of evil. She, too, was recounting her story for the first time in her life. In her story, the being also left through a doorway, although neither of us placed any significance on that detail in our retelling to one another. I can say that I knew for certain if I acknowledged the presence by the slightest overt movement, I was certain I would be attacked. I guess that could be construed as a form of invitation, though to be honest, to me, it was an act of self-defense. Until now, I had no idea any other people had ever experienced anything similar. Until she and I shared our experience, I thought it was just something unexplained in my life. Now I am not sure if I should take comfort in my sanity or worry a lot about this being or beings. 1983, Santa Cruz, California. It was a beautiful day, and we had been on the beach all afternoon. The sun was starting to go down, so we thought, let's pack up and hit a local pub/restaurant and get a beer and something to eat. We walked to the car about a half mile from the beach. As we were putting our towels and beach stuff in the back of the car, we noticed 2 young people standing looking at us, a young male around 20 and a female the same age. Both looked zoned out, kind of strange just standing there watching us. I walked up to them and asked if they were okay and if they needed any help. Neither one of them said a word. All of a sudden, Katya started screaming at me, "Get away from them." I turned to look at Katya. She was very pale and shaking. I then turned back to the couple. I noticed their eyes and saw that they were totally black. The feeling that came over me was very, very scary and heavy. A thick darkness seemed to cover me. I felt a little numb, and my legs would not move. The guy with the black eyes asked me if they could get a ride. His voice was so shallow and unemotional. Before I could answer, Amy stepped in and said, "Sorry, we are not leaving right now." She grabbed my arm to help me walk away from them. I started to trip out and wanted to get the hell away. I could barely move. The weird girl reached out her hand to touch me, but I moved away from her. Her face looked so sad, and her eyes, so black. The whole time this was going on, Katya was in a paranoid state. Amy got the three of us to start walking away, and then the guy called us shits. My friends and I kept walking, never looking back. We went into a bar nearby and did some shots, forget about the beer. No one believed our encounter with these black-eyed people. We used to talk about that day and get creeped out. I sometimes feel like they are around just watching me, but when I look for them, there is no one there. I will never forget this bizarre day at the beach. Katya and Amy won't even talk about it anymore. I have terrible dreams about them getting inside of me. I know there is something real going on out there, I'm just not sure what it is or why. 2000s, Ruskin, Florida. One afternoon I was with my cousin, and we both decided to go outside and ride his scooter. We would take turns going back and forth down the road. Well, when it was my turn, I started off normal, but then something caught my eye. As I looked up, I saw this little girl with a white skirt and black sweater. She had long, curly, golden blonde hair and black eyes. I thought she was just a girl from the apartments, but little did I know I was staring at a spirit. It took me minutes to realize she was a ghost. I yelled at my cousin, saying, "Did you see her?" And he said, "There was nobody out here, just me and you." I told him I just saw this little girl staring at me, but she quickly disappeared. He thought I was crazy until it turned dark. We were both sitting on the hood of my mom's car when I saw that same little girl walking into the wooded area. I turned to my cousin and pointed to her. I said, "Do you see her?" He was speechless as we both continued to look at her. She smiled at us, and then she literally just disappeared. At that moment I realized she wasn't a real person. 2003, Ohio. I lived in Ohio about 12 years ago, give or take. My husband and I went into a Cheddar's restaurant, and while we were waiting, I saw a number of grown men with black eyes just like it has been described by other people. They were dressed normally and eating like everyone else, and I noticed that they had baseball caps on. I didn't feel threatened at all. It just took me by surprise, but since I had to wait to be seated, it gave me time to observe them and feel alright about what I saw. Many months later, I was in Walmart and encountered a woman with black eyes, too. She was shopping like everyone else. It made me pause a second, but I didn't feel afraid. I can't explain what this was. I never saw it before or after this. I don't know if I would have felt the same if any of them looked at me, but they didn't. I find when I searched for information, there were all these scary stories about them, and it didn't seem to resonate with my experience. My husband also noticed at the restaurant and felt the same way. It is something I can't explain or find answers that I feel are believable to me. 2013, Dulce, New Mexico. My father and I were in Dulce, New Mexico, today. I've lived in NM since 2000 but have never been to this town, despite it having quite the history in cattle mutilations, etc. As we were inside the grocery store, there were two very strange-looking teenagers wandering around, almost like brothers and sisters. The younger boy was about 11 and had his hair slicked like alfalfa from the Little Rascals, and the teen girl was wearing dark black sunglasses indoors the whole time. Upon leaving the store, another family was coming in, a white, engineering type, nerdy government lab-looking type with a Native American woman, along with their 4 children. There was a baby in the basket covered with a blanket, a 2-year-old, and what looked like 4 and 7-year-old girls. The nerdy, engineering type white guy and his native-looking wife seemed like a strange combination to me for this insular community. Then, there were the children, whose skin was much, much darker than that of what I assumed to be their Native American mother. The 2 girls stopped short of me as I was coming out of the grocery store entrance. The way they looked at me, almost animal-like, in curiosity, with silent gazes and their heads cocked inquisitively, almost like a curious puppy dog, with what seemed to be extremely dark black, very reflective, glistening eyes. Knocking, phantom doorbells, and crying lady. I live in a townhome in a gated neighborhood in the northeast of my city. So an upper middle class area. I have always been intrigued by the paranormal because of certain occurrences and experiences I have had. About 3 years back, I was in my bedroom at 3 a.m., cliché, right? Awake on my phone, being the teenager I am. And all of a sudden, I heard the doorbell go off 3 times. I had no idea what had just happened, because who the hell rings a doorbell at 3 a.m.? So being scared shitless but also being the only one awake, I went to look out a second-story window overlooking the walkway to the front door. And I saw the driveway, and there was no car. I couldn't see anyone out there, and there were no footsteps or noises that could tell me where this person was. I just went back to my room and in the morning told my parents about it, but they heard nothing. Another of this same occurrence happened, but this time it was knocking. I had just woken up and heard knocking at my bedroom door. It was 3 knocks, and then it stopped. I froze in solid fear. I didn't know what to do, so I slipped under my covers and texted my parents. No answer because it was past midnight. I heard nothing, and the weirdest thing was that the light right outside my door was on, so if there was someone standing at my door, I would see a shadow outline of where their feet would be. But there was no outline. Didn't sleep at all that night. The third and final one was probably my scariest experience. I was in my room late at night and on my phone watching videos. When all of a sudden I hear a woman crying like her whole family had just died. And cats, so many cats meowing, but they were deep meows and less high-pitched than normal. It sounded like it was coming from under my bed or close outside my window in the backyard. I felt a sense of fear that I had never felt before. I felt the room heat up around me, and I started to panic. I called my parents, and they answered and told me to come upstairs. They didn't believe me and told me that it was probably just a phone malfunction or a video playing in the background, but it couldn't be that. I still to this day have no idea what it could have been. But I'm sure that it was something awful. Disappearing SUV and phantom voices. My young daughter and I were doing the 4-hour trip from Missouri to my hometown in Illinois at the beginning of July. We were reaching the end of our journey, roughly 20 to 25 minutes from my grandma's home, where we stay when we visit. We were on the highway when I got behind a really slow driving, beat-up white SUV. It was covered in faded old bumper stickers and just worn out looking overall. I actually was like, ugh, when I saw it. To our right was an exit to a city about 45 minutes from there. I decided I'd pass the SUV and moved into the left lane. Up ahead I saw a reduced speed sign and realized the 2 lanes merged into one and decided I'd slow up and get back behind the SUV. As I did so, they began to reduce their speed, so I went ahead and accelerated a little to pass them completely. I checked my side mirror as I passed them but didn't look directly at them as I passed like I normally would. I couldn't tell you why. As I checked my mirror, suddenly the vehicle was nowhere in sight. My first thought was that they were in my blind spot. I checked both side mirrors and my rear view multiple times, and the SUV was gone. I rubbernecked to check the aforementioned exit ramp, SUV not in sight. Even though I knew deep down that the vehicle had been going too slowly to have already exited onto the interstate, I scanned the interstate and the ramp again, checked all of my mirrors once more, and even turned in my seat. That thing was just gone. I sat in my seat, jaw dropped in a daze for several minutes straight. I have no logical explanation. I had always heard those glitch in the Matrix stories before and had always chalked it up to tired minds or liars or whatever. I wasn't tired by any means. I'd had a full night's sleep, it was early afternoon, and I'd had a good bit of coffee along the way. I was wide awake. So it had me wondering, are glitches a real thing? I told a few relatives when we reached our destination, and they all frowned in confusion, but they didn't call me crazy, so that was a relief, but I hate not knowing what happened to me. This leads to the next part of my story. Later that evening my daughter was playing with my grandparents, and they were all laughing pretty loudly. Before that, my grandma had sent my teenage cousin to the basement to grab some cans of veggies for dinner, and we heard a loud thud. My grandpa then suggested that my cousin must be using the bathroom downstairs since the door always requires some force to shut properly. Several minutes went by, and I was standing in the kitchen watching my grandparents making my daughter laugh, and over their voices I heard a small child's panicked voice screaming, "Grandma! Grandma!" as if in pain. My initial reaction was that my cousin had sustained an injury, and his pain or fear was so intense that he sounded like a small boy in tears. I ran to the basement stairs and called down for my cousin, who casually called back up to me in his deep voice, telling me he was going to the bathroom and would be up shortly. I've had a lot of weird stuff happen to me at my grandparents' house over the last year or so, but this really creeped me out. I told my grandparents what I'd heard, and my grandma laughed it off, while my grandpa seemed genuinely disturbed. I successfully suppressed all of those thoughts from my mind and only managed to forget about them until bedtime later that evening. I'm usually the last to bed because everyone else turns in relatively early. I'd shut off the bathroom light and was smiling to myself and looking at my phone while texting my husband, and I felt cloth brush against my arm like someone had walked past me. I thought, wow, I'm an idiot for wandering in the dark without paying attention to where I'm going. My grandma usually hangs damp laundry in the doorway of her computer room, and I assumed I'd run into the clothes. Then I remembered she had the clothes hanging in a different room this time. I held my phone up, and I wasn't even near the computer room. I was facing a wall at a weird angle, and there was nothing and no one there. Woman claims she was followed by a black-eyed kid. I had met with a couple of my girlfriends for a quick late dinner at a restaurant facing Main Street downtown. I had parked about 3 blocks further away down Main Street, as this was the only parking place available at that time of day. We had chatted a while after dinner and then parted ways. I was alone on the walk back to my car, but there was the usual amount of people around. It was almost twilight, but still very light, and it was very humid and hot. As I walked along, I began to get the uneasy feeling of someone staring at me. I glanced back over my shoulder and noticed this 14 or 15-year-old kid in dirty clothes and an equally soiled hoodie. He was a very pale-looking boy, and he was following very close behind me. I began to experience a strange and nagging fear. All my life I have been something of a tomboy and felt that I have and could handle myself in many situations, but what I felt that day went right to my core. As I walked along, I had to wonder why someone, even a kid, would be wearing a hoodie on a 99+ degree day. I looked at him again, and our eyes locked. The shock was like a bucket of cold water being thrown on me. His eyes were completely, eerily, empty and black. No white at all showing. At this point I was almost in a panic. I hate to say it, but I was ready to run. Just then, I got even with another restaurant and ducked quickly inside. I nervously stood by the window and waited and watched to see him pass, but he never did. A few moments later, after feeling a little better, being in the company of others in that cafe, I went back outside, and when I couldn't see the kid anywhere, I almost ran the rest of the way to my car. This happened on a Friday. The nagging fear stayed with me for the rest of that weekend. I was very nervous, which isn't like me at all. I'm usually a well-grounded and outgoing person, but for the next 2 days, I cut myself off from almost everyone. All I wanted to do was to stay behind locked doors until the fear went away. I jumped at every sound. I'm glad no one knocked on my door that weekend, or I probably would have freaked out. I routinely checked my windows and locked doors and didn't really get any sleep at all, and when I did, I had nightmares of seeing those eyes. Thankfully the uneasy feeling had finally gone away by Monday, after I went back to work. A week or so later I told my friend, the one who saw you on TV, about what happened, and she said it sounded like a black-eyed kid, which, until then, I'd never heard of. I know what I saw was nothing in the way of makeup of any kind. But most of all, the fear that took hold of me was something so unnatural that the thought of it still bothers me, and I know it will be a while yet before I'm able to go back downtown. Spent the day alone in an empty haunted war hospital. About 20 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I worked as a window coverings installer in Sacramento, California. One day, an active veterans hospital off Highway 50 dispatched me with a large load of metal mini blinds. I met the lead maintenance man, who thankfully loaned me a rolling cart to help make transporting my materials and tools a much easier chore. He then led me into the building, through a maze of corridors, and up a large service elevator. The hospital wing was pleasantly empty as we exited the elevator. I was really happy to see I had the entire floor to myself, no patients, staff, or furniture to constrain my mission. I could work quickly without obstruction or distraction. The maintenance man explained how they just completed some seismic retrofits while pointing to some newly constructed drywall columns that concealed the brunt of their work. He said they took that opportunity to make cosmetic repairs, install new blinds, and give the place a much-needed paint job. He then showed me a typical patient room and said there should be one blind for every window on the floor. He told me he would leave me to it and to give him a call if I needed anything or when I was ready to leave. The last thing he said in a concerned, fatherly voice before entering the elevator was, "Are you sure you're going to be all right up here?" I responded, "Absolutely," in my best confident young man's voice. With a departing handshake, he entered the elevator cab. His question and its tone oddly hung with me as the doors closed and the whirl of the old elevator faded into a deafening silence. It was at that moment I was truly able to take in my surroundings. With the elevator to my back, I scanned the hospital wing in a clockwise direction. I was standing in the middle of a long rectangular room. Light and airy patient rooms filled the perimeter of the open room to my left. As I scanned right, the light quickly faded to an inky, opaque blackness that disappeared into a dark U-shaped corridor, which, after a short distance, made a sharp right and another sharp right to end up back where I started. Despite the new paint, the place looked like it exited a time machine circa 1950 with those pea-green ceramic walls and matching asbestos vinyl floor tiles. It was at that moment I realized this place was creepy as duck. But enough of that, I had a job to do and got right to work. First of all, I walked the entire perimeter to get a quick survey of where things were located, popping my head into each room as I passed. As I got to the dark hallway, my bravery waned. Due to the lack of light, I presumed there must not have been any windows to address, but I pushed on nevertheless to be thorough. As the dark engulfed me, it felt like someone plugged me into an electrical socket. I had never before or since felt the energy that surged through my body and immediately picked up my pace. Along both sides of the corridor were black rooms. After peeking in one, I abandoned my efforts for the absolute certainty that I was about to come face to face with something I would rather not see. I began to run full on the rest of the distance until I was back in the main hall. Luckily, there was only one room within the dark corridor that had a blind I needed to install. The entire time I was back there, it felt like I had 1,000 spectators, and I kept my eyes fixated on the doorway until I was done. The rest of my time in that wing, I was nervously on edge. The farther from the dark corridor I got, the slightly more at ease I became. However, I kept hearing distinct footsteps, bangs, knocks, a bucket being kicked and sliding across the floor, muffled voices, and a phantom intercom that sounded like an old movie. With 100% certainty, all these noises originated around me on that wing, despite the fact that no one was present. With each noise, I would pop my head out into the main hall or say, "Hello?" in what I'm sure was an uneasy voice. About halfway through the install, I finally stopped reacting until I heard, "Hello, can you coast?" and froze. It was the maintenance man, and I was super stoked to see him. He asked how things were going and if anything eventful had happened. Not wanting to sound kooky, I sheepishly brought up some of the noises I was hearing. He abruptly said, "No shit, this place is haunted as duck. I wouldn't work up here alone." He explained to me that the hospital had been an active war hospital dating back to the 1940s and there had been thousands of deaths in the operating rooms that lined that dark corridor. He also mentioned that an electrician walked out earlier that week after something ran up behind him and growled. We joked around a bit to ease the tension, and then he left me alone once again. The rest of the day was surprisingly uneventful. Things seemed to have calmed down, and I felt more calm. I remember feeling extremely relieved to leave that place behind, and I was also completely exhausted that afternoon, so I crashed out to sleep early that evening. To this day, this remains the strangest experience of my life. The Phantom Cops. A little pretext for the event. Woke up around 11 a.m. I got myself ready for the day. Had a couple things to do. I had to go to my local music shop and get a new kick drum pedal. I also had to go see a friend about some green goodies. So I do both of those things. Pick up my paddle and greens and go home. Get to my apartments. Sometimes in my parking lot, and mine only at my complex, a cop sits and clocks people coming over the hill to my apartments. Go police. So he's sitting there as I get home. I grab the paddle, leaving the green one behind, and go inside. Now once inside, I do a few things to give the cop time to leave his post so I can go get the important stuff from my truck. The kick pedal is for the drummer in my band, so I had also wrapped a little bow around it and was going to set it in my front seat for him to see when we head to practice later that day. About 30 minutes pass, and I go to my window and look out, and sure enough, the cop is gone. He is nowhere in sight. So I immediately go and grab the pedal to take it to my truck, walk out of my door, down my steps, and out of the main door to my building. Overall, the total time from when I looked out of the window to when I got outside was approximately 15 seconds. As I step outside, I see a police officer sitting on his motorcycle, which is turned off and positioned sideways, while he talks to another officer in the car through the window. It seemed like they had been there for a while. I was so stunned that I stopped dead in my tracks and just stared for a second. I went to my truck, placed the pedal inside, walked back to the door, and sat there for a while. I realized they both could have pulled up in that 15-second window of me walking outside, but the vibe of the whole thing was off, and they didn't look like they just pulled up. They were in a conversation. Phantom headlights. About 4 years ago I was driving from my mom's house to my house in the middle of the night, 2 hours apart, which was a monthly thing we were doing at the time so my partner and I could bring our kids to see my family. In the car were myself, driving, my partner in the passenger seat, our 3-year-old behind the passenger side, and our fairly new Bubba behind me. We didn't usually head home this late, but I had been in pain, I have some tummy issues, and needed it to pass enough to drive us home. My kids were both already asleep, and we transferred them to the car to head home, with my partner falling asleep about half an hour later. At about the halfway home mark, there's a stretch of road with double yellow lines, and either side of the road is tree-lined. It was quite dark, with fewer streetlights until you get closer to the next little town. There weren't any cars coming up that I could see yet and no cars behind me. A couple of minutes into that stretch of road, the pain started coming back pretty intensely, and it always starts up my anxiety, as I'm never quite sure how bad the pain will get and I'm always left exhausted. I didn't want to wake my partner, considering he was the one needing to be up for work in a few hours. So I concentrated on breathing through the pain and keeping my eyes on the road. Soon after the pain started, I noticed headlights behind me on high beam. 1 second he was way off, and the next second he was right on my ass. I was already going the speed limit and couldn't slow down for fear he would ram me, so I just held on tight and thought, he'll go round me, and it'll be fine. About 20 seconds later, he swerved to my right to go around me, which I appreciated because I could barely see with the high beams illuminating my car. However, there were now oncoming vehicles, and he was in their lane while attempting to pass me. He came so close to my side that I was certain he would take my mirror out. I figured he was in a big car, the headlights were at about my shoulder height, so I knew I'd be no match for this car if he hit us. As soon as he was beside me, I began to slow down so he could get in front, but he suddenly swerved all over the place and shot off to the right as if he had hit something or lost control. I pulled over within seconds to leap out and see if he was okay. Looked up and down the street, but the other cars had gone on by like nothing had happened, and there was no sign of him having gone off the road anywhere. I got back in the car trying to calm myself down, and my partner had woken up. I told him what happened, and he suggested that he could drive us the rest of the way. I get really car sick, so I wasn't keen, and we headed back off toward home. I was explaining it to him a little more when I realized that when he was next to me, my side mirror had been black. With how close he was to my car and the headlights on high, my side mirror would have blinded me. I freaked out at that fact and stopped to get my partner to drive. I realized as well that I had never heard the car. He was right next to me going at least 100 kilometers per hour. I would have heard the engine, I'm sure. I have wondered since then if this was some kind of warning, perhaps to stop and swap drivers to avoid a crash that we would have experienced if we had gone further, or even to prevent me from driving while I was in pain. Who knows? It meant I couldn't calmly drive that stretch of road even in daylight again. When we moved near my mom, I drove through there alone, thinking that if I crashed, my partner and kids would be safe. So I was able to get through there without panicking. I'd like to relate a personal experience that I had when I was an adolescent in the hope that others might be willing to come forward and share any similar experiences that they may have had. The time of year was late winter or early spring, around March or April, I believe, of 1978. I was in junior high school, 7th grade, and 13 years of age. It was a weekday at about 3 p.m., and school had just let out. I left the junior high school, which is located next to a hospital in my hometown of Ridgewood, New Jersey. Ridgewood is located about 20 miles from New York City, in Bergen County, a very populated area of the state. I walked, as I did most days, home from the junior high, now a middle school. My parents' home was located about 1.5 miles from the school along a very direct route. Most of the walk was on the street on which the school was located, followed by a left and a quick right toward the very end of the walk. So, I'd normally just walk out the front door of the school, take a left, and proceed straight for about 1.4 miles, the last 0.10 of a mile being that left and the right, at which point I was at our house. That was the route that I would normally take. However, I had a run-in with a group of boys that bullied me on a regular basis, so rather than taking a left out the front door of the school and proceeding due south for that 1.4 miles, I'd go left and then take another left at the very first traffic light after leaving the school. I'd then walk to the next street over and take a right onto that street, again walking due south. It wasn't much of a departure from my normal route, as the street ran parallel to the one I'd usually take to get home. I'd been doing that for at least a couple of months in an effort to avoid walking past the homes of the boys who were bullying me. Therefore, I'm confident of the fact that there was no way I would have become lost or confused about my whereabouts. However, one day as I began walking home, I noticed that everything seemed strangely quiet, almost muted. The normal noise and bustle associated with the after-school rush of children walking home from school was oddly absent, and the quiet was rather eerie. There were still cars and some pedestrians present as I walked down this busy suburban street, but there was an odd, unreal feeling to everything, along with this disturbing muted silence. The street that I was walking down was called North Pleasant Avenue, and the intersection that I was approaching was at the corner of North Pleasant and Ridgewood Avenue. After crossing Ridgewood Avenue, North Pleasant turned to South Pleasant Avenue, and I would pass the elementary school that I'd attended the years prior to entering the junior high in September of '77. At crossing that intersection and approaching the elementary school, I was approximately 0.8 miles from my home. I mention these facts only to continue to emphasize that this was a route and neighborhood in which I was used to traveling. As I continued south, from N Pleasant toward S Pleasant and toward the intersection of Pleasant and Ridgewood Avenues, I saw the traffic light, the same familiar stores at the corner, and the small parking lot in front of the stores. However, these landmarks appeared to be getting further away as I walked closer to them, and still this odd silence persisted. As I continued to walk toward the intersection, these landmarks continued to appear to recede further into the distance as I approached them. I began feeling very disoriented and anxious, and then, nothing, a complete loss of memory. I simply do not remember anything past the point of approaching this intersection and seeing it recede further into the distance as I walked ever nearer to it. My next memory was of awakening, for lack of a better description, on another street in a different part of town, a fair distance from where I had started from at the junior high school. I remember feeling very shaken and confused and somewhat frightened. What had happened? And how did I end up in this different area, nowhere near where I'd begun walking, and nowhere near where I'd blacked out? This is where things get a bit stranger still. Within a couple of minutes of coming to, my mother pulled up in her car, parking along the curb of the street where I was walking. I opened the door, and she looked at me with great concern and said, "John, are you all right?" Now, normally my mother did not come looking for me if I was a bit late arriving home from school. Remember, this was the late 70s, and parents were decidedly more relaxed about the comings and goings of their children. My mother never picked me up from school unless the weather was very severe or we had some kind of appointment after school, and as long as I was home by dinner, my parents didn't worry or wonder about my whereabouts. If I didn't come straight home, it was assumed that I was at a friend's house or had some kind of after-school activity. The fact that my mother knew exactly where to find me was surprising, and I asked her how she knew where I was. She replied that she was home, doing chores around the house, when a voice in her head said, "Get John, he needs you." She, of course, asked me what had happened, and I told her about the receding intersection, the strange silence, the memory loss, and waking up to find myself walking in this other part of town. I had no idea what had happened, and to this day I still do not, apart from a vague memory or feeling of having been told or shown something significant. Who told or showed me what, and where it happened, I cannot recall, although I feel at some point that I will recall the entire incident. I simply feel that this event was significant for a reason that I can't explain, but its meaning will eventually be made clear to me. Being that this was over 30 years ago, I cannot accurately recall the time that I awoke or what time my mother found me. However, I don't think it was a great amount of time, certainly not more than an hour, and probably less than that. 30 minutes, perhaps? So the time was maybe 3:30 or 3:45 in the afternoon, I'd estimate. It may have been later than that, but not by much, if I recall correctly. I've always felt that the strangeness of this incident is compounded by the fact that my mother was somehow involved and contacted. If I had simply blacked out or become disoriented and wandered off, I could accept that as being a possibility, although I had no history of seizures or blackouts. But the fact that my mother was told to get John, he needs you, makes me believe that there was some outside design and involvement in this, the nature of which I do not know. The Phantom Moon. To start with, I'd like to tell you about one of my experiences with the uncanny. Because, despite being a somewhat skeptical resident of the simulation, I know I can't explain everything. And this was the most unexplainable occurrence I've ever witnessed with my own two eyes. It was the summer of 2016, one weekend in August. It was the peak of the Perseid meteor shower, and, as was tradition for me and my dad, we had decided to drive out to a hill in the Chilterns, away from the hellish glow of our light-polluted town, to get the best view we could. A perfect stargazing spot we'd been to several times before. My dad is an avid stargazer, and we'd taken his telescope out there before and seen Saturn and Jupiter. But this was the first time we'd gone there for the meteor shower, having previously only viewed it from our garden. Which wasn't a bad view. The garden was surrounded by trees that blocked out a lot of the glow of the streetlights, but we were sure that out there in the middle of the countryside we'd see a truly spectacular display. We were accompanied by my partner and my cousin, both of whom had never been out there before. The night wasn't looking to be as great as we were expecting. The sky was clouding over rapidly as we drove out to the hill. My dad was still optimistic and reminded me of the 1999 solar eclipse we'd seen from a beach in Cornwall when I was about 8. The sky had been just as overcast and miserable, leading to him cursing the heavens for ruining our view. But, as the eclipse had neared, miraculously a hole had opened up in the clouds, revealing the sun glaring through. That had itself been a very spooky experience, but nothing that couldn't be put down to coincidence. However, what was to come that evening still sends chills down my spine when I remember it. We arrived at the hill, parked up, and began to trek to the summit. It wasn't a long climb, but the hill was steep, and it certainly gave the four of us a mild workout. We laid out a couple of blankets and settled down to, hopefully, enjoy the show. But as the sky began to darken, it seemed clear that the weather was not going to play ball. We were obviously disappointed, and my dad's optimism began to fade. But my partner and cousin said we should wait a little longer to see what happened. So we continued to watch the clouds roll over, and on the horizon we saw a clearing begin to form. It was sunset, and the last rays of day illuminated the underside of the cloud cover, which was a beautiful sight that almost made the trip out there worth it. The sky was ablaze, like it was on fire, even though overhead the cloud was as thick as ever. Once the sun had vanished, we also noticed the moon rising on the opposite horizon. A bright silver orb dotted with craters. It was seemingly much larger than usual. I stared at the object for a moment before tapping my dad on the shoulder and pointing his gaze to it. "I didn't think the moon was supposed to be full tonight?" I said. I'd checked the moon phase for that evening to see if it would be too bright to see the meteor shower. And it was supposed to be only a half moon. My dad shook his head in confusion. No, it definitely wasn't supposed to be full. But there it was, the moon as plain as day rising over the hills in the distance. I grabbed the attention of my partner and my cousin and directed their attention to it as well. All four of us witnessed this enormous, super large full moon making its way towards the cloud cover overhead. There was no mistaking it. Then, things took an even stranger turn when my dad called to me and told me to look straight up. Overhead, a hole had begun to open in the clouds, just like it had happened during the eclipse all those years ago. And there, as expected, was the half moon. The real moon. The four of us shared confused glances as we looked from the moon above to the one on the horizon, still hanging there. As we all stood there in silence, mouths agape, we watched the full moon in the distance begin to fade from white to orange to nothing. The real moon above soon vanished back behind the clouds, and we sat for a while, trying to rationalize what we'd all seen. Perhaps a giant spotlight, we thought, or, who knows? Really, we could think of nothing that would have been bright enough or large enough for us to mistake for the full moon. And the object had appeared in the clear part of the sky, not projected onto the clouds as one of us suggested. We soon packed up our things and headed for home, with no hope of seeing the meteors and this sense of quiet unease after what we'd seen. I spent the next few days researching aerial phenomena to try and find anything that might have explained what had happened. But to this day I don't know what could have caused this peculiar vision we'd all shared. To add to the strangeness, in the years since, I and my dad have periodically reminded each other of this event, and we both remember it vividly and share this sense of discomfort over it, like we had seen something we shouldn't have. But, oddly, my partner and my cousin have since said they have no memory of this event. They remember our trip to the hill, but nothing about the second moon. If it had only been me who'd witnessed it, I'd have waved it away as some kind of hallucination, which would have been fine by me. But the fact that my dad remembers it, honestly, makes it even more unnerving. And I don't think I will ever forget the night I saw the phantom moon. Phantom memory about a non-existent friend. To be completely honest, I am not sure if this story belongs here or on another place. This is a true story about what I believe is a memory from what I think could be a parallel universe, and yes, I know how crazy that sounds. This past Christmas morning was just like any other past Christmas. Ate a lot of turkey and other foods the night before, Latin American family, came home, put away my gifts, and went to bed. The only thing is that this night I had the most bizarre, realistic feeling dream. In my dream I was at a convention with my wife and her friends, looking for some nerd stuff. I wander off because I can't stand shopping and go get a slice of pizza when I run into an old friend. This old friend, who I know is real because we speak weekly, tells me that she is here. Now she has a name, which I can't remember, but she did have one. I remember feeling really nervous and excited at the same time. I was excited because I knew I hadn't seen her in years, but I was also nervous because I knew my wife didn't like her. I follow my friend to see her, and as soon as we meet, we give each other a really big hug. We start talking about past times and how I used to go to her house to watch The Simpsons or how I needed to comfort her mom when Dr. Phil died. She told me her mom had passed, and I remember feeling sadness. I remember then that she pulled out her phone and asked if this was still my number. I said no and gave her my new one, which was a different number than the one I have now. As we were talking, I heard a huge rumble behind me, and as I looked back, I saw a brilliant light. I look back at my friends, and they are both gone. This is when I wake up. I woke up in a state of panic, like I was feeling in the dream. What really bothers me is that the details of the dream seem so real and unlike anything I usually dream about. That feeling of nervousness is 100% real because I'm always afraid to introduce my female friends to my wife. The memories of us hanging out and her mom feel real. In fact, I could almost feel those memories. I can't help but constantly recall those memories. Lastly, the cell number I gave her was a number I don't recognize, but it feels so natural to me. It felt like remembering an old school ID or something similar. After I woke up, I felt this incredible urge to contact her, yet I had no idea who she was. I went through old emails, all my contacts, and even an old cell phone to see if I had just forgotten about someone. Nothing came up. It's odd, as I tell this story, I can almost feel my memories of her coming back but quickly disappearing. Any thoughts on this phenomenon? Could it be just a dream, as I suspect, or could it be more? The dog I never knew, but I talked to. Before I was born, my family lived in an old bungalow, which was pretty spacious considering its size. My family decided to get a dog called Higgins. This decision was made because our house was frequently broken into and we had some strange experiences. Not paranormal, but odd occurrences inside the property. Anyways, Higgins was a German Shepherd, so an intruder would have no chance. Right? Well, my family thought so welcome, Higgins, the German Shepherd. A few times, my dad always experienced ghostly shadows moving across the walls in our living room. Of course, I wasn't there, so I have no idea if this is true or not, but I believe him. Anyways, my father always claimed the shadows would come up close to him, close enough for him to jump up off the couch, where he was sleeping, and face off with the being. But, after Higgins was brought into the home, my father claimed to have never seen the phantom again for now. But Higgins's life was cut short. The reason for this is that we had to have Higgins put down because my brother Kyle was born. Higgins was a dangerous dog. Since Higgins was loved so much by my family, my mother tried to tell the kids that Higgins became a police dog and was working for the police force. Eventually though, my mother told them in the end, and that was the end of that. You're probably wondering what that phantom I talked about had anything to do with the story. Well, later on after Higgins's passing, the black figure returned and this time targeted my mother. My father decided to sleep with my mom despite the differences. My mother claimed the being would wake her up at night and start talking to her. I don't know if that part was real, but this part I'm about to tell you now has some truth to it. My father also experienced the shadow in their room. My dad decided that the next time he saw the shadow, he would confront it directly, just as he had done before in the living room. The week after, it appeared again and approached my mother, completely avoiding my father. My father told me the other day, I threw punches at this thing, and it would not go down. Eventually, the phantom disappeared and was not seen again. Ever again. Oh, by the time this happened, my mother was pregnant. She was about 5 weeks along, I'm not sure exactly how long. My mother lost the baby shortly after. My father still believes it was something to do with that spirit. He now refers to it as a demon. A few weeks after that, my mother was expecting another baby, and guess what? It was me. This is where the title of the story fits in. My family decided not to tell me anything about Higgins and the hauntings. When I was 4 years old, I used to lay out my cars on the table and play with them. I used to lay out an empty chair next to me for God knows what reason. I used to talk to it and say stuff like, "I'm having my dinner now," or like, "Are you having fun?" Speaking of fun, I told my mother, when standing in the kitchen, that I had no one to play with. As soon as I said that, my Thomas the Tank Engine ball rolled across the floor. I then told my mother I'm going to play with him. She then asked who he is. I replied, saying, "Higgins." Phantom red truck. My dad and I went out to run a few errands about 3 months ago. We got some groceries and then went to the drive-through pharmacy. There was a red truck in front of us that was sitting there for a good 5 minutes. I live in a small town, so 5 minutes is a long time. I turned to my dad to complain, and then the truck was gone. Nowhere in sight. We looked around since it couldn't have gone far. It simply vanished. We pulled up to the window and asked who was in the truck. She just stared at us confused. She said we had been waiting for 15 minutes until we pulled up. Fast forward to yesterday. We drove by the pharmacy and saw the same thing happen that my dad and I also experienced. We saw it from how the pharmacist explained it. Except yesterday we were driving in a red truck. I've lived in 2 houses that had things I can't explain happen. I want to preface this with the fact that I'm an atheist and that I believe very strongly in the scientific method, science, reason, etc. I have also experienced a few rare instances of sleep paralysis, and nothing about my childhood experiences is similar. I'm not really one for woo. I still think about all the strange things that have happened around me, and I can't explain most of them, which annoys me. This is about some of the things I experienced in my childhood home. A few of these have other people involved, which is actually kind of comforting because it means I didn't hallucinate wildly for 7 years. A bit of backstory: the house I lived in from age 7 to 19 is in a small Midwestern town surrounded by miles and miles of corn. The oldest parts of the house are about 150 years old. I started noticing strange occurrences when I was around 12 years old. These stories aren't in a cohesive timeline, these are memories of different things happening to me as a teenager. Various spookings in my childhood home include various phantom footsteps around my home, things moving of their own accord, lights being turned on/off, some pretty ducked up nightmares, voices, cold spots, the intense feeling of being watched, to the point where it would wake me up at night. Footsteps. There were various sets of footsteps I'd hear on and off living there. Once I was sick on Thanksgiving, so my folks left me home when they went to visit my aunt. I was lying on the couch downstairs, and I heard footsteps coming up from the basement, like heavy boots. There is only one way in or out of our basement, and the door isn't far from where I'm sitting. I had the door to where I was closed, and that day I'd randomly hear footsteps walking around. That night I was still feeling pretty crappy and didn't want to get off the couch, so I slept downstairs. In the middle of the night, I'm woken up by footsteps coming down the stairs. I hear them walk by the door and into the bathroom. Also, I remember them going back up. The whole thing was weird because there's a bathroom on the second floor. In the morning I was like, WTF, guys? Who came downstairs to pee? And my fam was like, what? No one did. There was one set that scared me pretty badly. I'd be in my room at night, and I'd hear a crash from downstairs, like something knocked a bowl off the counter or something. Then I'd heard them literally sprint through my house downstairs, up our old staircase, and stop in front of my bedroom door at the end of the hall. This happened more than once. So as a teenager I was lying in bed about to fall asleep, and I heard my mom coming up the stairs. This was strange because I believed she had already gone to sleep. I hear her come into my room, and then silence. At that point my parents had given up and let me decorate my room however I wanted, so I'd hung a curtain around my bed. As I was lying there waiting for her to come say good night, I was thinking she was just looking at my room and going to tell me how messy it was. But nothing. Silence. I waited like a solid minute, and then I peeked out from the curtain. There's no one there. I never heard any footsteps leave. Lights. I only directly engaged with the entity once, but it actually helped improve the situation. I was usually the last one up to bed at night. We all slept on the second floor. Growing up in a weird/creepy house, I'd leave a light or two on downstairs as I made my way up to my bedroom. My mom would be the first one down in the morning, and like, every ducking light would be on. I actually got in trouble for it more than once, and when I protested, they'd be like, oh, did the ghost do it? LOL, it got to the point where my mom threatened to make me go to bed first before anyone else, and I was pissed. Alone in my kitchen after she walked out, I said to no one in particular, this isn't ducking funny, stop it. It never happened again. So things are moving. I had a glass top on my dresser. Some nights I'd hear things clinking around, like someone was gently rifling through my perfume bottles and stuff. On my desk I had a little wooden box of bath salts. Now this was a box with a flat bottom. My house was old, so my room was on a bit of a slant, like if you dropped a pencil, it'd roll away. I couldn't sleep without a fan going in my room, so I had this air purifier box thing right next to my desk with a vent facing upwards. One night I'm jolted out of sleep by this loud noise, like someone is throwing shit around my room. This was before I started consistently sleeping with a light on. I'm looking around the room for the source of the noise, but I can't find it until I notice my box of bath salts was knocked over into my air purifier. At first I chalked it up to the slant of my floor, but later on I was like, wait. How did a flat bottom box tip over on its own, directly into my air purifier? One of my childhood friends also saw things move. We were in my kitchen, and as she turned and looked towards the coat closet, she saw a hanger lift up sideways for literally no reason. We were like 18-19 at this point. She didn't tell me about it until later because she knew how much this house ducked with me. Nightmares/being watched/voices. So when I was a teenager, the best computer we had was downstairs in what we call the piano room. Our house wasn't huge, but it had lots of rooms because it was old. The family computer, my mom's piano, and the stairs to the second floor were all in that room. When you used the computer, your back was to the rest of the room, and the stairs were to your back/left. You'd be typing away, and you'd get this intense feeling of being watched coming from the stairs, and at times a feeling of cold would drift over from that area too. This would happen when we didn't have the heat on or anything, so venting wouldn't explain it. But there was always this intense feeling of being watched. It happened in my room regularly as well. I'd be woken out of a dead sleep by this seriously intense feeling of being watched. It had come from the foot of my bed, about 3 feet from the ground. Like if a child were standing there. I remember one night specifically. When I was younger I didn't really have vivid or super memorable dreams. I know I dreamt, but nothing stayed with me during the day that often. This night was different. I was having a normal boring dream, and it was weird. Like it was movie film, and it began to warp and literally tear down the center as a new dream forced itself through. I watched as my dream tore in half. The new dream was of a gravel road. I actually know the road, it's about a 15-minute drive from my home into farmland. In my dream there was a little girl in an old-fashioned / fluffy dress walking down the road. This entire dream appears to be in sepia tones, resembling an old film. The little girl just walks down the road toward me and stops, probably about 20 or 30 feet away. She just stands there, staring at me with light eyes. You know how you know things in dreams without them being said aloud? Just as she was standing there staring at me, it was like, "This is who is in your house," and after that I woke up to the really intense feeling of being watched. From the foot of my bed. About 3 feet off the ground. This dream specifically ties into voices in my childhood home. I didn't hear them, but a friend did. So I, my brother, and my 2 best childhood friends, who were sisters from the block, were all watching Law and Order, SVU in my living room. One friend went to use the blow dryer, a curling iron, or something similar in the bathroom at the end of the hall, while the rest of us continued watching TV without paying much attention. About 5 minutes later, she returned and asked, "Who was on the phone?" And we're like, "Huh?" There was no phone call on the show, no phone rang. She said she heard a phone ring and a little girl's voice. Like a little girl was in the next room talking on the phone. The youngest person in my house is my teenage brother, who sounds like he's 30. No children were on the TV. We all shrug it off, and she goes back to the bathroom. A few minutes later she's standing in the entryway to the living room like, "Guys, I heard it again." WTF? Now where she was standing was directly next to the closed door to the basement. Remember the basement? With the boots? Yeah, that basement now, according to her, this is what she heard next. Footsteps sprinting up the stairs, stopping right behind the door next to her. She also hears the light switch flicking furiously on and off. She screams and runs to the back stoop door. In a panic, we all follow her and stand outside while she tells us what she heard. We literally stood out there like idiots until my boyfriend arrived. This was also the same day my friend, her sister, saw the coat hanger lift on its own. This all happened in the childhood home I grew up in. I moved out when I was 19. I still don't like sleeping without a light on if I'm alone. Phantom footprints in the snow. This happened in Ontario, Canada, during the winter of 2012. I was walking home from work at around 3 a.m. The temperature was well below zero, and the walk was long. There was a large parking lot without a single car, and it was covered entirely with freshly fallen snow. Not drifts of a fresh, even, light snowfall of a few cm tops. Now I get to the glitch in the matrix part that I will never be able to explain. In the middle of this snowy parking lot, there were footprints that appeared as if an invisible man had been standing there or as if someone had flown away. I don't know. To clarify, the entire parking lot was covered in undisturbed snow, with no footprints leading to or away from the single set of footprints in the middle. No one was standing in the middle of the parking lot, and there were also no tire tracks in the snow. The parking lot was completely fresh and undisturbed, with evenly distributed snow, except for the inexplicable footprints in the center. The world record long jump would not make that distance if jumping comes to mind as an explanation, and there were no snowdrifts to have covered the trail of the footprints. The footprints were like running shoes and looked as if they had just been made, as the snow had not had the chance to fall where they were. There was no way, that I know of, that anyone could have made the footprints without walking to or away from their location, which boggles my mind. Regretfully, I did not approach the footprints and was sure to keep my trail at a distance from them to preserve the integrity of the scene. In hindsight, I should have approached or yelled at the footprints or done anything to explain them other than observe. It's not a big deal, but I will wonder for the rest of my life about it nonetheless. If I was not clear on anything or you have further questions, please ask, but most importantly, please try and explain this. Thanks. Beware the room number 4. When I was a young boy, I was more spiritually attuned than most of my friends, families, and associates. I was prone to accidents, too. I don't know if I was careless or if something else caused them. When I moved to California, I lived in an affluent but small town near Concord. I still remember bits of that oddly out-of-place apartment building that seemed to stick out of the early 80s kind of vibe. The main building was on the main road, but the place felt secluded away from the people living near the area. As soon as we arrived at the entrance of the apartment complex, I kind of felt a little nausea, almost. This sick feeling I had inside was welling up, especially when I stared at my new apartment with my mom and sister. It was a wooden door with a metal sign that indicated it was room number 4. Even now that door kind of makes me feel uneasy. It was a small 2-bedroom apartment with a kitchenette attached to the tiny living room behind the front door. From the front door, my room was directly ahead, and to the right was my mom's room. In front of her room, or on the left side from the front door, was the tiny and dinky bathroom. I walked into my would-be room, but the whole time in there I felt a tingling sensation that made me want to jump out of my skin. The wooden wall felt almost menacing or mocking me. I could even make out a wailing face on one of the wooden panels. Thankfully, on the first night, none of our furniture had arrived, and so we all slept together on the floor in the living room space. The next day, however, was the day I regretfully experienced my first haunting, and I will never forget the fright that I received. Overall, it was a busy day of moving in the furniture and our stuff into our respective rooms. The day passed almost peacefully, and at night we decided to watch the television together. Now, even though I don't like ghosts or things like that, I was a youth that was curious about the otherworldly things. That night we decided to watch a paranormal show that they claimed was of true live events. Oh, how young and foolish I was. It was roughly 10 p.m. when I decided enough excitement had filled my day and went to bed. Back then I could only sleep when the room was completely dark. I loved the feeling of aloneness in the face of darkness. But that night was the start of the beginning of my experiences. I tried lying down and was about to fall into my slumber, but something bright was flickering against my closed eyelids that annoyed me to the point of sitting upright. My bed in this room was on the opposite corner of the door to my room. I had a sliding door to the back, but the back of our apartment was just enough for maybe a bike or two before the fences surrounded them. Beyond the fences was a taller building that blocked out the sun and the moon. Now back to the main point, there was almost a light that was shimmering past my bed and in front of the sliding door. The light was literally just a few feet off my bed next to my bookcase. It was more of a glimmer than a full-on shine. It was faint at first, but it began to be brighter, almost. The light began to almost evolve right before my eyes. Suddenly my stomach dropped, and I was shivering under my covers. I could not believe what was happening. Even though I was in a completely dark room, the light began to form itself into something much bigger. At this moment, all I could do was just stare at it. The hairs on my arms, legs, and the back of my neck were all jutting straight up. The projection began to form a person. An old lady who could pass to be in her late 60s or early 70s was upright in front of me, staring into the back sliding doors. My jaw slowly dropped, and it froze in place. My mind began to race and question what the heck was going on. The figure wore a shawl and seemed to be in her late-night gown. For a long time, I didn't even know how to describe her appearance to anybody. But the thing was, I could clearly see past her projection in my room. I saw my bookcase past her ethereal body. I intently stared at her for no more than 30 seconds when something changed and my body heat dropped. This phantom began to realize that something was different in the environment. Her face started to twist, and then she turned her face toward me. At first as a glance, and gradually, both of her eyes were directed to me. I felt my whole body freeze up, and my already frozen heart drop to its darkest depth when her eyes started to focus. She began to notice me staring back at her. What still chills me to this day is the moment when her eyes met mine. Then her face contorted into a wail-like state, as if she was in physical duress. As if she was in pain and wanted someone to know. In this case, it was my young self that was in front of her. The torment did not end here, as she almost flung herself toward me with her right arm extended and her fingers desperately wiggling toward me. Before she could get to me, I screamed bloody murder and ran toward the door. Flinging it open, she ran down the tiny corridor toward the living room space. Thankfully my mom was awake, and she, with a worried face, asked me what was wrong. I led her to my room and told her there was a stranger in there with a finger pointed to where she was standing. I could not enter the room, and my mom flicked the switch to the light to find nobody in the room. I asked her to check fully. She flung open my closet and verified there was no one there. She tried to open the sliding door to find it locked from my side. I told her the exact harrowing figure I saw in that room. She chided me, saying that it was just a dream or I saw an illusion. But my pounding heart told me otherwise. That night and every night in that room, I slept with my lights on, or my mom gave in eventually and got me a nightlight. I never saw her again and did not spend too much time in there unless I had the door open all the way. We only lived in that apartment room for just under a year. Then another unit with bigger rooms was open for rent, and we moved right into the other unit. I felt a huge relief that I would not see her again. But the true chill only came to light when we left that place. One day, I had a chance to speak to my apartment manager about the dreaded room number 4. I asked him about who lived there before us. He told me another family lived in that room for much shorter than us. He said at first they were happy to rent out the place, but in less than 3 months, they moved out without giving any reasons for the move. Then I started to ask him about who else lived there. He began to think for a moment and then said that his mother used to live in that room a couple of years back. He told me that his mother was a great artist who taught him how to paint. I asked him why she moved out of that accursed room, but his smiling face began to droop. I asked him if he felt alright, and he said that his mother unfortunately passed away. At first I apologized, and then I asked how she passed. As he was forming sentences, I began to sweat and felt a deep pang of chills in my stomach when he said that she died in that room. My jaw dropped a little, then I mustered up what little courage I had and asked him where exactly. Then he looked at me, saying, "She died in your old room. She was working on a project when she suffered a heart attack." His words were echoing in my ears as I looked at the menacing door in front of me. Unfortunately, that was the start of my experiences with the paranormal. Beware the unlucky number. P.S. Especially in my culture, the number 4 represents death. I keep talking about things, and then they happen a few moments later. It's been about a year now, and I've never really thought much about my experience with this until a few weeks ago. I used to dismiss myself thinking about something and then it happening a minute after down to it being a coincidence. I started noticing it when I was in the car a few weeks ago and my fiancé, and his friend were driving to grab something to eat. We were talking about what luxury cars we would love to have. I said a Rolls-Royce Phantom and a luxury performance car would be something generic like a Lamborghini. A few moments later we came to a roundabout where, out of nowhere, we saw a Rolls-Royce Phantom. All of us in the car found it weird how we were just talking about that and we saw one. We live in a city in the UK where most people live below the average earning, so we were surprised to see one. A few moments after that happened, we saw a Lamborghini on the opposite side of the road from us. We were freaked out, but we just put it down to coincidence or a wedding, even though the person driving the RR looked like a well-off woman and there were no passengers. A few days later we were in the car again, and we were talking about a girl we previously knew, i.e., she moved away once she got married. A few minutes later we saw her walking down the side of the road. Even though she moved to the total other side of the country and had no association with where we were driving, as far as we knew. We stopped the car, but by the time we got out, she wasn't anywhere to be seen. We had all seen her, so we can't put it down to it being mistaken for someone else. None of us do drugs, and we haven't been drinking. The fact that this happened a few days before with the cars made it even more creepy. I usually have little glitches here and they're like this. I've always put a logical explanation to everything, and all of this most likely could be a coincidence, but I'm not sure after the 2 most recent incidents. If anything like that has happened, or if you have any explanation for it, please let me know. My invisible roommate. I moved into this apartment nearly 12 years ago. I moved in with a boyfriend back in the day. I knew the minute I saw pictures of this place on Kijiji that I wanted to live here. I put dibs on it the day I viewed it, even though it was a place I was going to be sharing. I wanted it that bad. I didn't feel the need to get his approval. After all the crappy places we had looked at, I knew he'd love it too, and he did. A week after we moved in, I was sitting at my desk in my office, actually exactly where I am sitting now. I heard the front door open. I have never greased that door. I like hearing it open. It has a squeal, so no one can sneak in on me. Before I go further, let me describe the layout. This building was built back in the late 1800s. It is actually the oldest corner in my city. I am in the heart of downtown, so there are ground floor shops lining the street. This apartment complex was built above the shops. As it is downtown, the shops are narrow but very long, and this apartment is the same. So you enter from one end and step into a hallway, with a doorway on the right going to the kitchen and doors to a couple of closets along the hallway. After the hallway is the dining room, then the living room, then my office, then the back of the apartment with the bathroom and my bedroom at the very back. So you have to go through each room to get to the next. There is a step down from the front door to the hallway and a step back up when you get to the living room and a step down to my office and bedroom. This place has a few features that make it cool. The levels are part of it. Anyways. A week after we moved in, it was pretty late in the evening. I heard the front door open, I heard it squeal, and I heard footsteps coming down the hallway and stepping up into the living room, then silence. I got up and poked my head into the living room to see if my BF had come home early. He worked nights back then. There was no one there. I searched the whole place, no one. Even though it totally freaked me out, I tried to forget about it and headed to bed. A couple of weeks later, it happened again, so I mentioned it to my BF. He said he had been having the same kind of thing happen to him when he was alone here. It took a half dozen times, but we both realized that we heard this about 10 to 15 minutes before the other came home. We literally heard each other come home, before we did. Does that make sense? Then we noticed other things. I could feel someone playing with my hair on occasion, and so did other girlfriends when they came by. Or you would see a glimpse of someone in one of the mirrors I had all over the place. One day I was working in the kitchen, and I felt a hand on the small of my back, as if someone was leaning over my shoulder to see what I was doing. My BF would feel a hand on his shoulder, and so did other males who visited. The other person living here didn't play with men's hair, just the ladies. Lol, we'd hear bumps and knocks and find little things missing that turned up in odd places. You know, just weird stuff. So there has been lots of activity here over the years, nothing too outrageous and nothing that really scared us, as we both loved ghost stories. However, there was a night in 2014 that, thankfully, we have never experienced again. I was working in the kitchen that night. I had started a side hustle business, and since I'm a night owl, I find myself far more creative in the wee hours. I was alone, my boyfriend was still working overnights. My kitchen is a galley-style kitchen with a long counter at the back, so when you are working, you have your back to the doorway. I was finishing up for the night when I heard a sound that left no doubt in my mind. It was my boyfriend coughing. Just a short cough that came from the dining room. Or that is where I gauged the sound to have come from. It sounded just like my BF. I called out for him, but there was no response, so I figured I imagined it and went back to what I was finishing up. Suddenly there came loud, pounding footsteps down the hallway from the dining room toward me. I jumped a full 180 to turn towards the doorway and cast side glances around to find a ready weapon. I fully expected someone to come around the corner, and I wanted to be prepared to defend myself. But there was nothing. I mean, there is no way I could mistake what I heard. I have no neighbors above me, just the shop below. No one lived on either side of me, and the building is just 2 levels. So the noises weren't coming from another unit. Sadly and terrifyingly, I was going to have to go down that hallway to get out of the kitchen. I waited 5 heart-pounding minutes, but there was only silence. So I screwed up all my nerve and dashed out of the kitchen, down the empty hall, and through the empty dining room and living room to my office. At that point, I had rearranged my office furniture, placing my desk against a wall that provided a clear view down the entire apartment and halfway down the hallway towards the kitchen. I was alone. I hopped on Facebook to see if I had any friends who were still up to talk to. I was totally freaked out. It was almost 3 in the morning, but I did get a response and started typing. But when my fingers hit the keyboard, there came a ruckus from the kitchen that sounded like the cupboards being slammed and bowls and things being tossed about. I was terrified. As I was describing all this to my friend, those pounding footsteps came back down the hallway. Back towards me again. I could hear them, but there was nothing there. I jumped up into the doorway to the living room and said in my sternest mommy voice, "That is enough." And it stopped. All of it. I searched the apartment, and I was not only alone, but nothing in the kitchen had been touched. It was all just as I left it when I scooted out of there earlier. It took me a long time to calm down that night, but this is when things get weird, as if that isn't weird enough. 2 days later the power in the back of the apartment started acting strangely. Everything would be fine, then all the power would be out, then it would flash back on, then go out again. It wasn't just the lights, all the power would be gone. My poor computer hates being shut off like that. We told our landlord about it, and he had an electrician in right away to take a look. This is nuts, but he discovered that the first outlet on that circuit had caught fire in the wall a few days earlier. I'm sorry, pardon? On fire? How did I not notice that? And holy crap, that was about when I had my scare with the pounding footsteps. Then it dawned on me, I didn't notice the fire, but they did, didn't they? He coughed and ran to the kitchen for water? He searched the kitchen for something and then ran back towards the fire. He, whom I always took to be a man, had reacted to it in real time. He knew what was going on, even if I had no clue. I felt like such an idiot for yelling at him. He was just trying to warn me. But what I want to know is, how did the fire just go out? Did he put it out after all with his phantom water? It has been 8 years since that night, and though he is still glimpsed in the mirrors and still plays with ladies' hair, he likes to knock about doing whatever ghosts do, but he has never scared the crap out of me again. It has been many years now that I have lived here alone, and I am not afraid of my roommate. In fact, I like that he is watching over me in this place we call home. Orbs in the woods. I've been thinking about sharing this odd event from my life for about 10 years, but I don't know where to start. Setting: a cabin in a heavily wooded, somewhat remote location with neighbors in a small town who are quite far away. In Columbia County, New York, close to the border of Massachusetts. Time/date, around 1 at night, summer sometime in 2014 or 2015. Before this time I had already been witness to 2 other unidentified aerial phenomenon events, both times fully sober, and together with friends who were also fully sober and sane and who also fully saw what I saw. One of these events was not very interesting but was certainly not explainable as something of this world, and the second event was utterly mind-blowing and life-changing, not terrifying. Neither event is important for me to get into now. I am simply mentioning this to say that leading up to the event that I am about to describe, I was already completely certain that supernatural phenomena are not always just the stuff of fiction. So I guess you could say I was maybe somewhat more mentally prepared for this event than someone who had never experienced anything supernatural before. How the day started. I spent most of that day outside working in a field, which was not my normal work day, but it happened to be a day where some farmers I knew needed some extra help. It was a nice moderate summer day with very little wind, and I was enjoying feeling the dirt and digging up radishes. I finished my task and drove back towards home, and on the way I spotted a yard sale and decided to stop and have a look. I saw some strange art someone was giving away for free. It was a smashed up bird carcass that had been preserved and spray painted gold and glued to a canvas. It was not for me, it seemed creepy and amateurish. Next to it in the free bin sat an interesting looking clay sculpture of a nude man, about 20 inches tall, kind of like a classic Roman statue. It had some parts broken away to reveal the metal rod structure it was built on. This was also spray painted fully gold. It seemed to be the work of the same artist. Something about it I found cool and humorous, so I decided to take it home. I put it up on top of a high cupboard in the kitchen, overlooking the dining area and living room of the cabin. My girlfriend and I had been living together in this cabin on the side of a small mountain for somewhere over a year, and we liked it. It was peaceful and quiet, and though the winters were tough, the other seasons were so beautiful that they made up for the 5 or so months of gloomy weather. We really enjoyed the privacy and secluded cabin lifestyle. We each had our jobs and friends within 45 minutes of home, so while we were very isolated, we weren't too far from civilization. Anyway, I got home and showed my girlfriend this statue. We both agreed we liked it, and it would look good as a kind of centerpiece in the main living space of the cabin. We went to bed around 9 or 10. I had been getting really restful deep sleep in that cabin. During the summer we would usually leave several windows open and get a nice cross breeze. All that fresh forest air really helps with sleep, in my opinion. I'm also a person who 99% of the time has good dreams. During that time, I was pretty into practicing lucid dreaming and keeping a dream journal, and I generally never had bad dreams. This night was different. I had a terrible nightmare. I woke up in a sweat. All I remember was the tail end of my dream and feeling uncomfortable and nearly at the point of a full panic. As I was waking up, I could hear my own voice from the dream, and I was pleading with something, "I'm not ready for this. I'm not ready for this. Please not now," over and over. Now I was fully awake, and I decided to go to the bathroom and take a leak. I was a fan of using red nightlights throughout the cabin so that I wouldn't throw off my sleep too much if I got up to pee. I walked into the dimly lit bathroom, which was about 4 footsteps long, and I took 2 steps past the window, and as I was doing this, in my 2 o'clock semi-peripheral vision, I noticed 2 white balls of light, one above the other and perfectly aligned. These lights were exactly at my eye height and just a foot outside the window, which was wide open. I could hear the sounds of the forest beyond the window screen, and this thing was dead silent. The woods were also very quiet at night, so any faint sound we could hear very easily. The lights tracked my head movement basically at the exact same speed but continued sailing past. I told myself I must still be dreaming, and I jumped to the window to see if I could catch anything else. As I did this, I saw the pair of lights quickly turn past the corner of the cabin. Okay, so I tell myself, this isn't your first time seeing something strange. Maybe it is a moth or a bird with a moth, or who knows what, maybe it is a paranormal thing. At this point, I don't want to feed this anymore. I decided the best course of action would be to just go back to bed and not alarm my girlfriend, who was still fast asleep. So I go back to bed. The head of the bed is directly underneath the window. I start falling asleep, my eyes are closed, and suddenly I sense flashes of light on my eyelids. I'm lying on my back, and I open my eyes and look directly up, and I tilt my head back towards the window, and I see a green laser-like light pulse directly over the highest point of the rooftop. The light did not move in a continuous fashion, rather, it looked like a 4 feet long line that was traveling at 2 frames per second, so it essentially jumped ahead of itself. It was totally weird and hard to really describe in a short paragraph. At this point I decided I couldn't go back to bed. I sit there for a minute or two contemplating things, and the next thing I know, my girlfriend is getting up to use the bathroom. On her way back to bed, she notices I'm awake, which is unusual for me, and asks if I'm okay. I tell her something along the lines of, "Hey, not to alarm you, but I think there is something going on outside tonight, and I can't fall back asleep. I just have an uneasy feeling, and I saw some weird lights." Her response was basically, "I'm too tired for this, and whatever you saw is probably nothing, and I'm going back to bed." So she goes back to bed, and I at this point am a little mad that she didn't want to stay up and at least attempt to see what I was talking about before writing me off as a crazy person. About 10 minutes pass and nothing happens. I start to doze off, and then the lights hit my eyelids again, and I see the same strobing green beam of light outside. I wake my girlfriend up and tell her that something is definitely outside and that she should look. We both sit up and look out that window together and see a big white orb that is just 15 feet away and 20 feet high in front of the nearest tree, past the yard and on the fringe of the woods. It's hovering there perfectly still, and while it has a very bright white light, it looks like it doesn't emit any light onto anything. There are no parts of the forest being illuminated and no shadows cast. My GF is like, "Holy, I thought you were tripping, whoa." I'm like, "Will you please stay up with me now because I'm spooked?" She's all, "Of course, there is no way I can get back to bed now." Okay, so here is where it gets crazy. My girlfriend says she needs to pee again, and I tell her it's okay, but please don't use the bathroom in the bedroom because I don't feel it is safe. So she goes to the other bathroom, which is at the other side of the cabin. While she is gone, I hear the shrillest screaming ever. It's super loud, and my GF rushes back, and we are both like, WTF. The screaming continues, and it sounds like a baby in distress. In the 18 or so months we had been there, we had never heard anything like that. At the most, you might hear a turkey or a barn owl, but nothing so disturbing. We both decide to walk to whatever window is closest to where the sound seems to be coming from outside, and we stand there and are like, WTF. The screaming continued for about 2 minutes straight. We were utterly petrified during this entire incident and couldn't do anything but listen in horror. I think either it was an animal being frightened by the orbs, or an entity cooperating with the orbs and attempting, successfully, to make us scared. We return to the bedroom and are both trying to think logically about what the duck is going on. We consider the possibility that the sound is coming from a distressed creature outside instead of a monster, although we are uncertain. I had recently seen what looked like fish or cats in the nearby creek, which are known to make hideous sounds. Whatever the sound was, it was incredibly unsettling. At this point we are both shook up, and we see that the white orb is still outside. This time it appears to have divided up into 3 smaller orbs. We both say, "F it, let's go out to our porch and look at this thing. Maybe we can get some video." I go out first because my girlfriend is a bit more scared than me, but I was like, "Yo, you better be watching out for me." I would not have had the balls to do this alone. So I go outside and get a really good look, and it's definitely not a drone, no sound, completely still, and then perfect movements that are like something only you could do in computer animation but not with real aircraft and physics. It's doing this dance. It will blink a few times and go back to one orb and divide again. I think it may be trying to lure me closer. It's kind of mesmerizing. The dance reminded me a bit of one of my other UFO experiences. I decided to try to get some video on my old iPhone. I was pretty sure at night on a new moon, which I think it was, whatever video I got would look like crap, but I decided to try anyway. I go back inside and grab my phone and then head back out with it. As I head back outside, the orb is now gone. At that moment, I realized that the orb could either read my mind or observe me through the walls to some extent, and the bad dream I had just woken up from, where I was trying to bargain with something, was actually about this orb. So I put the phone back, and within seconds the orb is also back. This reminded me of that old Looney Tunes cartoon with the frog where nobody believes the frog can sing. At this point it's becoming funny for me, so I tell my GF, "Hey, I don't know what it wants, but it doesn't seem to be coming after us, so why not come outside with me?" She decides to come outside, and we watch for a bit, and then it goes back to being just one orb and slowly but in a perfect straight line starts to go back into the woods and up the mountain. Over the course of about 2 minutes, we watch it go backwards further and further until we don't see it anymore. What is crazy about this part is that it traveled in a perfect straight line, but through an extremely overgrown, dense forest, and somehow it never had to turn past a branch or anything. It had already somehow calculated a perfectly straight path, which is basically like finding a needle in a haystack in 1 second flat. To me, this demonstrated that the entity possessed a high level of intelligence. At this point it is about 3:30 a.m., we decide we aren't going to sleep this night. We decide to move to the main porch overlooking the pond. We are chatting about all the possibilities and how crazy this is, and we are curious if that was it for the supernatural event or if more stuff will happen tonight. We stay outside, and around 4 a.m. my GF says, "Hey, look, it is back over by the pond." The pond was about 200 feet away, downhill, and around 300 feet wide. The orb moves in a perfect half circle clockwise around the pond, then suddenly returns to its starting point from a few seconds earlier, followed by a perfect half circle counterclockwise before disappearing. That was it for that night. The next day we both go to work as usual. When we get home, we agree we need to get out and see some civilization, so we head over to a restaurant in nearby Massachusetts. While we are at the restaurant, we overhear a nearby table talking about all their past orb experiences in the area. It is a group of 5 or 6 people, all with something to say about it. My GF and I decided not to go introduce ourselves. At this point we are just like, this is too crazy, we just want our life to feel back to normal. A few days pass. I've become a very light sleeper. I've become fixated on looking outside all the time to see if I see any more lights. About 5 days later, I spot a light from the far end of the pond, but this time it is more like the form of a boulder. It isn't moving at all, but it is the same quality of light as the orbs were. I realize that the statue I brought home has its head positioned directly towards the source of this light. If you could draw a line of where this statue's eyes were focused, it would be where the light is. Immediately I connect that I brought that statue home the same day as the orbs appeared. I hadn't connected it until then. I tell my GF we have to get rid of it, and we need to go sleep somewhere else for the night and hope the light goes away. We wrapped the statue up in paper bags and drove it to the nearest gas station and threw it in a garbage bin. For the next few years I basically became an insomniac, and my mental and physical health really deteriorated. Before the orb I was probably at the peak of living my best life. Things got really dark after that for a while. My GF later reminded me that before the event she had been having reoccurring dreams about a glowing white cube in our woods, so much so that she had decided we should go build a replica from her dreams, and she had asked me to help her on this art project a few months before. She also told me that before this event she had been having a reoccurring nightmare about a shadow figure peering in from the same bedroom window above our bed. We stayed there for a full 3 years without experiencing any other spooky events, which we were thankful for. However, a friend did once spend the night, and we let him use our bedroom as the guest room while we slept in the main room. We never told him about the orbs, but the following day he said he woke up at night to a growing green light, which was in the room beside him for several minutes. To help ease his nerves, I suggested maybe it was the smoke detector light. He immediately changed his tune and said that must have been it. I still don't really know what to make of it, and there's plenty more I could say about it, but this will have to do for now. I saw a phantom years ago. I'm a 15-year-old girl, and when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was about to go to my grandmother's house on a train instead of taking our car because it's in really poor shape. My mom and I had to wait 3 hours to even get on the train, but at about 2 hours in, when it came to waiting, I was sitting with my mom talking to her, and then I stopped talking for a full 5 minutes because in a row of seats pressed up on the white wall of the train station was a teenager, a boy, for that matter, but what struck me as odd was that 1, he was in emo-ish attire and as pale as you could get, and 2, he had no face from what I could see, but once I started staring, I had to blink, and he was gone, like maybe he faded away or something. Then I went on the train. The time was 1:03 a.m., so I'm not very sure of what happened, but I'm curious if anyone else had a similar encounter. Either way, I wasn't afraid, which is kind of odd. Phantom footsteps. This event didn't happen to me but rather to my mother, someone whose personality and demeanor deserve a mention for a better understanding as to who she is as an individual. She's always been a very religious woman, hailing from a small village in Italy where Catholicism was, and still is, a prominent staple in every aspect of her life. The idea of something being paranormal isn't something she takes lightly, always believing that there's another plane of existence seldom seen by the naked eye. She's lived in the States for the majority of her life, keeping any and all religious beliefs mostly to herself, as she's now a mother of 2, I being the oldest, who don't exactly share her philosophies on the existence of God. Luckily she's never been one to push her agenda down anyone's throat. But that's a little beside the point, I'm getting ahead of myself. This event took place quite a few years ago, and when I say a few, I mean roughly 20, back when my brother and I were both in elementary school. I'm approaching 30 now, but I'll never forget the look of sheer terror and confusion on my mother's face when she desperately tried to make sense of an experience that she still can't, even to this day. For context, the school we attended was within walking distance from our house. We could practically see the schoolyard from our driveway, if you can believe it. Every day at exactly 2:10, the kids were released from class and gathered into lines where a chaperone, usually one of the kids in the upper grades, would walk at the front to make sure everyone got home safely. At the time, my mother's work schedule ensured that she'd be home a few hours before we were. With 2 little kids and no one trustworthy to babysit us, her job was pretty understanding of the situation, making adjustments whenever necessary in case we had a half day or got dismissed early. This was especially important since our dad wasn't usually home until about 5 or 6 in the evening. From what my mother recalls, she was home alone one afternoon doing laundry down in the basement. It was roughly 1:45 when she heard the distinct sound of our front door swinging open. Now, just for the record, my mom is half deaf, and has been her whole life. It's not too uncommon for her to beckon us without hearing a response until she is within what she calls relative earshot. Naturally, when she heard the door open from what she just assumed was her children coming home early, she called up from the basement to make sure everything was okay. She didn't get an answer. Moving a little closer toward the bottom of the stairs, she called our names a bit louder. Elizabeth? Derek? Still, no answer. Thinking it might have been my father coming home to grab something he'd forgotten, she was about to call his name when the sound of 2 sets of heavy footsteps broke her attempt. Not only was it startling, but also a little out of the ordinary. My dad is a welder, which requires him to wear heavy work boots. Hearing him come home that early in the day was a little bit odd, but nothing my mother couldn't chalk up to a slow day on the job. Unfortunately, that's when things started becoming more unsettling. Not only did she hear 1 set of boots, but 2. And they were now running across the kitchen in a sprint. My mother kept shouting our names, raising her voice until it was on the verge of rasping out. After a frustrated sigh and a moment to catch her breath, she suddenly realized that the footsteps had gotten quieter. Slightly faded off in the distance. She'd have prayed for a resolution, but it wasn't because they were leaving. It was because they were now ascending straight up the stairs to the 2nd floor, where all of our bedrooms were located. I'm sure an Italian curse of some kind must have slipped from her mouth at our lack of response, not to mention being forced to drop everything she was doing from all the ruckus we were causing. When she got to the top of the stairs, it took her a moment to notice that the door, which had opened, was not only latched shut but still deadbolted as well. As kids, we were normally absent-minded about that sort of thing. It wasn't in our nature to come home and make sure everything was locked up once inside. We were more interested in finding our mom to see what she'd made us for lunch. Again she called out our names without any response, as was now the expectation. She called for my dad, hoping he was just somewhere out of earshot. She listened for a moment, only to be met with silence. Even the pummeling footsteps that had damn near shaken the floorboards had seemingly ceased altogether. No walking. No running. No, nothing. It was almost as if 2 little phantoms had barged through the house just to get a rise out of her. After a while, she figured it must have been her ears playing tricks. It wasn't exactly the best conclusion given how deafening everything sounded, but she did occasionally hear things that weren't there. Nevertheless, it was almost time for my brother and me to come home. So, with little left to consider, she figured her imagination was simply stirring at the anticipation of our arrival. It was a mild inconvenience, but she decided to just go back and finish her laundry as quickly as possible. Minutes passed without any interruption. There was no activity going on upstairs, none that she could hear anyway, and the soft, immersive hum of the dryer was enough to maintain her focus for a while. But you know that old saying, all good things must come to an end? Everyone seems to forget it tends to happen without warning. As the dryer shut off, the same footsteps from earlier began barreling down from the 2nd floor. And this time she knew it wasn't her ears playing tricks. Immediately shouting our names at the top of her lungs, she wasted no time running up to see why neither of us was answering. About halfway up, she heard the front door slam shut. The idea that it could have been the wind was quickly dismissed when she saw that the door was still deadbolted. How in the duck? Seeing it locked the first time was one thing, but to deadbolt a door from the outside was something else entirely. This was the moment she had thoroughly freaked herself out, questioning how many footsteps she'd actually heard. Were there more than 2 people in the house? Did one stay behind after they thought the coast was clear? Her mind was racing with possibilities, fearing that someone or something was still inside with her. Maybe she'd only managed to scare 2 of them off after they figured the house wasn't as vacant as they thought. The anticipation for us to come home was quickly turning into dread, unsure if there was an unknown intruder lurking about, waiting for an opportunity to harm the family she so vehemently protected. She refused to put any of us at risk, even if it was just paranoia. My mother would have preferred to look certain and foolish rather than dead from optimism. In a panic, she grabbed the closest object within reach, a broom. Not much of a weapon, but time was of the essence as she began seeing lines of kids walking home out the window. It'd only be a matter of minutes before we were haphazardly using our spare key to enter a home she no longer felt safe in. After checking every possible nook and cranny, every hallway, every crawlspace, she found nothing to indicate that a person, let alone 2 or more, had been in the house at all. No dirty footprints from a hasty getaway, no items out of place. Everything was in order and exactly as she'd left it. It wasn't long before my brother and I emerged through the kitchen door, hearing our mother blaring our names in an almost accusatory tone. For whatever reason, we both assumed we were in trouble for something we'd forgotten to do, a messy room or unmade bed before leaving for school that morning, but our tension quickly shifted when we found out that wasn't the case. She didn't look angry when she met us in the kitchen. Instead, she looked frazzled and confused, looking over each shoulder as if to catch a glimpse of whatever had put her in that state of mind. We'd barely managed to take off our backpacks when she frantically asked, "Why didn't you guys answer me when I called you?" We both looked at each other with about as much confusion as she had in her expression. "We just got home a few seconds ago," I said, kicking my shoes off near the wall out of habit. I'm sure my mother would have loved to believe that the sound of my shoes hitting the floor was what she'd heard, but I wasn't wearing boots. And quite frankly, the footsteps sounded much too heavy for a small child to have made them. "Weren't you just here a second ago, running up and down the stairs?" Again, we both looked at each other, thinking our mother had finally lost it. My brother spoke next, amused and nearly laughing through his words at the thought of us running in and out of the house only to come back a few minutes later. To him it seemed like a waste of time and too much effort just to give our mother a quick scare. "Mom, we've been walking in line for the last, 10 minutes. We just opened the door a few seconds ago. Besides, why would we be running up and down the stairs anyway?" I can only imagine what my mom must have been thinking after hearing that. Every bit of color seemed to drain from her face as she tried to wrap her head around what on earth could have made those noises. The tone in her voice didn't waver for a second. She was still trying to convince herself that it must have been us trying to pull an elaborate prank. We insisted we weren't, and deep down I think she knew that. We were kids, for God's sake. If we were lying, one of us would have eventually given it away by smirking or giggling. In truth, we were starting to become just as nervous as she was. We were young but still heard our fair share of ghost stories growing up, even having experienced the occasional paranormal incident here and there, albeit harmless and never enough to suggest we were in danger. Of course, it didn't help that our house wasn't new by any stretch of the imagination. Built in the early 40s, there was a pretty good chance innumerable accounts of eerie history saturated its walls. Thoroughly bewildered, my mom even went so far as to call our dad, who was still at work at the time. We could hear her over the phone as we settled down in the living room. The same questions she asked us earlier were only being repeated like a broken record, the same phrases laced in fear, over and over and over again. "You didn't come home just now? Not even to pick something up?" "No, I'm asking because I distinctly heard 2 people come into the house and, yes, just a few minutes ago. I heard 2, maybe 3, sets of feet in boots or something running up to the 2nd floor." Listening to the reception from his end of the call wasn't the best, especially back when flip phones were all the rage. Still, we managed to catch a few words here and there, none of which sounded like they were helping our case. Dad was insisting it was probably just the kids and to relax until he got home. She wasn't buying any of it. My mother, above all people, would have known if her kids had been lying. Eventually the thought of an intruder left her mind, only to be replaced by the possibility of a spirit, or multiple, being the cause of such a bizarre event, something she swears up and down to be the only acceptable explanation. We never did confirm who or what was running through our house. How the door had swung open only to lock itself twice. How she felt the house tremble with every footstep above her. It took a few weeks, but my mom eventually began to accept that whatever happened, plain and simple. Even the complete lack of closure wasn't enough to stop her from making the occasional joke or two, telling only her closest friends at first, the ones she knew would get a kick out of it rather than presuming she was totally out of her mind. Whatever it was, it hasn't happened since. Even now, 20 years later, she can recall every detail of that day as if it were still happening, the day she simultaneously mistook loud, hasty footsteps bellowing throughout the house as her mischievous children, her husband coming home early, intruders with ill intent, and a phantom in a hurry.